You don't want me karaoke. Okay, folks, I know people are still making their way up for lunch. We're going to start a little bit earlier, but the discussion went long. I was contacted by Pat Mangan. He's a retired battalion chief, assistant chief from Cleveland, and he wanted to talk to us about roadway safety. And if you don't know, recently we lost Johnny Tetrick to a roadway accident. So this is an issue that is important to us in the IFF. We have way too many firefighters and paramedics that are injured or killed on the side of the road. So Pat really wants to solicit information in your interest. So we got 15 minutes from Patrick.
Hey, Scott, can you hand these out? I don't have electronic. You're locked out of City Hall, otherwise I'd have a thing just passed over. There we go. Good. All right. Thank you. Again, by way of introduction, my name's Patrick Mangan. I retired from Cleveland Fire after 32 years as assistant chief. I was happy in retirement for a year, did a lot of things, and then the city asked me to come back and work on a project that would make the roadway, which is a new term, not just the highway, safer for police, fire, and EMS. What many people are not aware of is here in the city of Cleveland, we've lost people tragically to highway incidents, and that's a larger number than you would expect. Within the city, now in the city, we've lost 3 first responders in the last 7 years. And I think that that's important to hear. In my first 18 years on the job, we didn't lose 1. So it was sort of a sobering moment. The people that hired me are the people who pay the workers' comp bill, and it's $1 million loss. And they said, let's see what you can figure out to make this safer. So I sat down for a year and been looking at things. I've come up with some good ideas about both equipment, policy changes, and then also what the individual can do. And so I have 10 minutes to share with you what my thoughts are. At the end of that 10 minutes, Pat Corrigan's going to stand up and remind me, because I sometimes tend to go long and talk a lot, and he's going to remind me, we'll put 5 minutes into asking questions or telling me what you did in your area. Recently we did this, or what about that? So without further ado, I'm going to start. At the back, in both back corners, there's literature from the equipment people. It's there. On this side is stuff that I've created. This was a 55-slide PowerPoint I've reduced to what's in your hands. It's about 8 to 10 slides, right? If you want to see the full version, it's back on the left. Those that are not Cleveland Fire people, we have our latest SOP in the back, along with another page of improvements. Our improvements came at the death of a firefighter. And I think that's what's important for all of us to hear. Whenever something tragically happens, then we change our lives and change our behavior. Maybe we get vests, or we'll do some reflective stuff. And I think that's important to do, but I want one of the main points I'm trying to get today is, can you do anything before it happens? Can you change your policy? Can you buy some equipment? Can you look at the bigger picture? All right? So having said that, on the front of this thing, I'm just going to give you 1 sentence per slide. 1 sentence is what I'm trying to relay in the slide. The first one, down below, 3 dead, 2 disabled on a highway in the last 25 years. We've talked about that. Recently, how many people in this room have seen what happened when Engine 26 in Cleveland got struck at 79th and Kinsman? It was on Channel 19 News, live and repeated. Most of the Cleveland people are saying yes. That if you haven't, please look. I had it in a video, but City Hall's hit with a cyber attack. Look at Channel 19 News, and it says Cleveland fire truck hit on accident scene. Live footage, camera there, car smashes into the side of the fire truck, truck rocks, 5 to 6 firemen and police officers and EMS on the other side run for their lives. It would have been a disaster unlike anything we've seen already. We've had groups of 4 people hit. We've had people hit individuals. The most important point I want to put is on the very bottom of that slide. When does it happen? In all 5 cases that I've looked at, I've talked to Lieutenant Darrell Thomas. I've talked to Chris Holt. I've looked at the accident reports. It happens in the first few minutes we're on scene by ourselves. So I want that one message to be taken back. If you're going to think about a policy revision, think about what actions you take early on in the sequence. Okay, let's look at the second page. First slide, reviewed, what change our directives post-death or near miss. We already spoke about that. So I sat down and said, let's look at trying to get police, fire, and EMS on the same page. Obviously, the police department should have a directive. I contacted Cleveland Police, they don't have one. Nothing shattering for you that aren't from Cleveland. Then I contacted Cuyahoga County if there's any people in Cuyahoga County. What do you guys have? What is the law enforcement's answer on the highway? They don't have a policy. Even larger, I asked the Ohio State Highway Patrol, who attended the last time I gave this ceremony, bring me your policy on how to set up on a highway. They don't have one. It's important. On our last line of duty death with Johnny Tetrick, the defense team said Bracknell police set up too far back that they thought it was a different accident. I think it's important that police and fire get on the same page. If you're considering a policy revision, that should be included in it. Again, as I said that, anyone in this room, on the back, I made 25 copies so the Cleveland people take your hands off it. We have a pretty good SOP written by Art Nito and a group of people. Chief Schlomer had parts in it too. If you want to look at something that's as good as new that I've seen, it's out there. Next, let's look at the slide down below. List about 9 products that are out there. This is a national trend that's coming towards us. What's happening is people are saying, who's on the highway? Who's the expert? ODOT. They're there. They do it. Let's take some of their stuff. Let's take some of their equipment. So that's what some fire departments are doing. They're adding orange over black signage to fire trucks. They're adding attenuators, and we'll talk about those in a minute. They're giving signage and reasons on the fire truck, on the police car, both law enforcement is involved in this too, that gives someone advance warning. And I think it's important because many of us, when we see a blue light on a highway, we know, oh, there's a police car up there. Oh, we see a red light, there's police and fire up there. But if you see an orange light over the black background, you're going to start thinking, wait a minute, that's a traffic diversion. I should be moving right or left. It's even better than it's, think about this. We've all seen this, right, Obi? Go this way, right? Doesn't that mean something more than just this cluster of lights, right? So that's what these things, each one of them has its own function. ODOT's been using them. Some fire departments are taking advantage of that and using them on their apparatus. Some of this stuff is local. Anyone aware Lakewood Fire has a highway truck? Why? Anyone know why? 2 of the 3 deaths were on their border of Cleveland, right? So they built a truck. Some people are taking the same kind of truck, a flatbed truck, putting an attenuator, big old yellow pad that you see that lays down on the back of it, right, with an arrow board that tells traffic which to go, okay? City of Independence, close to home, they have coordinated orange lights. Our city in Cleveland, we're looking at getting coordinated signals from our apparatus up to the internet that will tell local trucking as they're approaching. So now I want you to take a look at some of these products. Turn to the second page. And again, I'm struggling without the PowerPoint, but that's what happens when cyber attack hits City Hall. All right, next slide. I want to know, does anyone know the term, what's a blocker? Open question. What's a blocker? Patrick. How about a blocker in public safety? And not someone blocking your promotion. A blocker, what? It's a hook and ladder, right? Right, a hook and ladder, an engine on a highway, it's going to block the traffic, right? The point of this slide, the big yellow one, is this. Why do we take a $2 million vehicle and put it across 3 lanes of highway, put 4 people on it and say, that's going to block and make things safe? They make $200,000 apparatuses designed to just do that. They have an attenuator, an arrow board, and in some cases, we'll talk about even radar-enforced camera. So that's the point. Think about it. It's not, this isn't Pat Mangan's term. This isn't something. If you Google blocker now, national fire companies are making blockers, and they're put on the website just like you want to look at our pumpers, you want to look at our hook and ladders, you want to look at our other things. They're calling them blocker. It's a new term, and I want you to think about it. So now let's go to the pictures and the fun part. I apologize, the pictures are small, right? But I think they're all important. On the bottom of page 3, you see one of these pumpers with an arrow board on the top of it. It's a little hard to see. Arrow board costs around $5,000 to $7,000. It's given direction. On the right of this page, bottom page 3, you see what's called an attenuator being attached to the back of an ambulance in Sioux Falls Fire Department. On the bottom, you'll see that some fire departments are actually attaching these attenuators to the back of their trucks, permanently attached. Again, it's made to think of creating a better, safer environment for the roadway. Let's look at the pictures on the next page. On the first slide above, there's 4 or 5 pictures. I want to talk only about the bottom one on the left, this one here with this little truck. There's literature in the back on it. It's called a lane blade. It looks like a plow that attaches to the front of a command vehicle, a pickup truck, and it can pick up a deer at 30 miles an hour and grab it off the highway. It can push a vehicle in its closed position. Do we push cars off the highway anymore? Do we clear them fast? When I started, Sean started, we were both on rescue squads. We used to pull these cars off, get them off the roadway. We don't do that anymore because someone complained we ruined their transmission. This lane blocker, the information's up there, can do that. It can also push a little snow if you end up buying it for your chief's rig and you want to clear off the apparatus, okay? On the right, to the right of that blocker, you see this yellow truck. That's Royal Truck's attenuator. It shows you 2 attenuators with an arrow board and the radar speed. When we're driving in our neighborhoods now, isn't it a new technology when they show speed limit 25, you're driving 35, slow down? Doesn't that work? Doesn't that tell us to change? Your behavior is not meeting expectations and we change it. That's what they're doing on the highway. This company's making these trucks in red, white, black, whatever color you want. And it's not just one company, folks. As I've learned for over a year, there is probably 5 or 6 that are doing it. Most of the fire apparatus companies are doing it. Most of the attenuator people are doing it, right? So looking down at the pictures below, on the left-hand side, there's the Lakewood Fire Highway truck. It's a stake body truck. It has an arrow board on it. It does not have an attenuator. Attenuators cost $28,000. To the right, where it says slow on that pumper, that has happened in Ohio since I started my job in the last year. That's Liberty Township down near Dayton, Cincinnati area. They had one of their 2 pumpers hit. They've put on this message board. A message board is different from an arrow board. Arrow board just gives you a direction. A message board is telling you things. They're probably twice expensive, but they're supposed to be much more effective. The last one, the raised arrow bars, that blue car in the middle, law enforcement people or command structures. That's from New York City. I don't know, where's the guy from Boston? Have you ever seen these things? Okay, so they're raised light bars. Instead of a light bar laying across a police officer's car or a chief's vehicle, when you get on a highway, it rises up like this, 3 foot tall. It improves visibility tremendously. Cost about double what the normal one costs, but it's worth it. We're trying to get, I put in for a grant from BWC to get 2 of those for a couple of police cars. I've put in to get 2 arrow boards, a message board, and an InstaAlert 24. We'll see what the Bureau of Workers' Comp does, and we're going to try and test them out here in Cleveland. Okay, let's go to the last page. I know most of the people in the room, you're not chief officers, you don't have a command in this, but what can you do as an individual? And I think that's important. If you want to look at these, I'm not going to read you. I don't believe in reading PowerPoints, especially this way. It's 10 minutes, is that right? All right, we're going to get to the questions in a minute. But one thing I want to draw your attention to is down there, number 8. If you decide to do something in this area and try to, hey, how can I make it safer on our highways, or what can I do? I want you to include everyone. I gave a presentation. This is you guys got 10 minutes of a 55-minute presentation I gave to the city of Cleveland people. Then I gave it to Westlake. Westlake had a hook and ladder hit. They gathered all the fire departments on the west side. We put in that room Geico, towing companies, 860. Someone was there from the governor's office. There was different people there, and we all had a discussion like this, and that's what we're going to get to in the next couple minutes. And we gave them an idea. And here's what I concluded. We need a holistic look. I want everyone to stop and look and say, what are we doing on the highway? A whole roadway. What's our response? Wide open. And then understand that's holistically. The second part of that is synergy. If you make a small addition or idea, it works, and then over here make a small addition, all 3 of those things combined can be wonderful. Example, listening to everybody, right? I couldn't tell you where it came from. I had a kid say, listen, how come we have so many people on the fire department at these accident scenes? Why don't we have one person? Here's a very low-cost solution you can take back to your own department. We have one person on that traffic scene. The accident is behind me. Their job is to stand in a protected position of cover by the hook and ladder with a vest on, looking back at the traffic. The minute they see a car violating the cones, hitting the flares in their hand, right? 3 short bursts of an air horn. I did it soft so it doesn't kill anyone's ears. What does that mean to us as firefighters? It means bail out, get out. When I mentioned that at one of these presentations, the Geico truck guy in the back said, hey, that's a good idea. Could we put air horns on our pickup trucks? And I said, sure. It would help. Almost every fire department goes with that bailout sound. Would it be better if every police department had it? Yeah. So there, I'm done. I thank you for your time. If there's any question or not, I don't know. I think I'm at 117, so I'm definitely on it. I have information in the back. I'll be here the rest of the afternoon. If you have something individual, come and talk to me. Pick up. There's different information in both corners. That's from the representatives, and that's the stuff that I created.
I've known Pat for many years, and you see the passion that comes out, and it's a very important topic. Losing one emergency responder on the roadway is unacceptable, so we just have to do better. And so thank you, Pat. Okay, so we're going to talk about PPE, everything PPE. Our next speaker, my colleague, Neil McMillan. When I first met Neil, he's the PPE whisperer, you know, as we go through this. But it's a challenging time for us in the fire service with our PPE. And what is our PPE designed for? And one of the challenges that we have is that our standards are really developed over time. And it seems like we're piecemealing them together. As we learn something or as we experience something, we're changing that standard, and we haven't really taken a holistic look at that standard, taken a step back and holistically looked at our PPE. And we have a grant right now where we're doing that exactly at the IFF. We have some subject matter experts, especially Jeff Stahl, Dan Madrzykowski, and others that are looking at that. But we're also in cycle right now for NFPA 1970, which is the consolidated standard for PPE. And we're actually going to Orlando next week because there's a push from 3M to send this back to committee. And sending it back to committee would be a tragedy because with Neil's leadership on the committee, we've actually made some great advances at looking at taking out the UV standard or test and other things. I'll let Neil pontificate on that. But without further ado, I want to bring up my good friend and colleague, Neil McMillan.
It's usually hard to, I guess, really fulfill the big hype that Sean gives me introduces me here. And I'm going to kind of lay things up a little bit ahead of time. After the break, I'll be talking specifically about where we are in the standards for PPE, both the design of the PPE, the different types of tests that are required for it, and also the laundering, care, maintenance. But to get some contextual background as to where other people are at, as well as where we kind of source some of our information from. I'm going to be covering some information, pinch hitting here for some experts out of Australia, as well as some experts out of the testing bodies. So, yeah, a very good point. Sean mentioned they want to be here, but they have a very hectic schedule flying across North America, discussing the issues of PFAS specifically in the fire service in Australia. So, unfortunately, due to flight arrangements, they offer their regrets. But we do have some of their information at the back of the room that we can share. And it's new, the topic of removing PFAS from our turnout gear, from our AFFF here in North America, but it's a problem that was solved a long time ago, going back to 2010 in Australia. So some of the advantages we have within the IFF is learning from those lived experiences. So they understood the contamination that were caused in military firefighting sites, as well as municipal firefighting sites from the use specifically of AFFF. That was the first thing they wanted to address. And when it came to the transition away from fluorinated foams, they wanted to make sure they weren't cross-contaminating, their fire apparatus with some of the remaining residue of PFAS. So it's, I know, a question that's come up. It's relevant here. How do we make sure that when we're putting in a 3F foam into our apparatus that, we're just not still, shoving out remnants of the fluorinated foams that were there previously? So they have a 32-step process for remediating their fire apparatus where they capture the effluent that they're flushing through their trucks. And at the time that they started this, the EPA had set the drinking water maximum at 70 parts per trillion, and that was a goal they were kind of really striving for. And now they've instituted this fire apparatus remediation process across the country of Australia, and it's been performed on all apparatus. It appears to be cost effective from their application, and they can lay out a blueprint. And there are resources they left with us, so we're willing to obviously share and circulate with their consent. So you can email, myself or Phil or Sean later on to get some of that information. But successive flushings, as well as other processes in place, have brought that level down to below 70 parts per trillion, which is impressive. And I think it's really where we need to start at from a North American perspective on that, from an apparatus standpoint. Beyond that, they've remediated the apparatus. They got to remediate the firefighters, and they ended up working with Macquarie University, looking at therapeutic phlebotomy, so blood draws, and they had selected a number of firefighters based on their levels of PFAS within their blood. And it was interesting because David Hamilton is one of the gentlemen who used to instruct on AFFF foam. And it was a real personal story for him because he was a real advocate of this. And he went to participate in this study, and he didn't meet the criteria. His blood concentrations of PFAS were not at a level sufficient enough to be entered in. And he thought this was pretty crazy. He was using foam pretty extensively, but he was also a habitual blood donor. Every year and periodically, I think it was every 3 months or 6 months, he was donating blood, which he equates to the reason why he had lower levels than what was to be expected. So the methods they used is they enrolled people to either donate whole blood or donate plasma in different cycles over the course of a year. And they had good participation, which adds power to the ultimate findings. And what they found was that they could reduce the levels of PFOS, PFOA, which they were measuring, as well as other PFAS, from the subject group that had those higher concentrations as compared to some of their colleagues and, of course, the general population. So look at some of the figures. I mean, the black line was the observation group, no interventions. The blood donations, the red line, and the blue donations, a plasma donation. And the reason why there was good effects with the plasma donations is that a number of these legacy PFAS, which is the ones that we're looking at, the PFOS, PFOA, they have a really strong binding affinity to human serum albumin, the protein in your blood. So because the proteins are concentrated in the plasma donations, that equated to those higher levels of reduction. So seeing that you get a 0.1% drop over the course of a year by doing nothing speaks to the biopersistence of these chemicals in us, and knowing that every exposure you get today will persist beyond is reason enough to avoid those exposures, which we'll be discussing in a little bit. But the plasma donations were quite effective. And when it came to the PFOA, we're looking at nearly 50% drop in a 12-month period from plasma to donations, which is, more effective than any other method that was previously looked at. I'm going to make sure I keep on time here so that I don't have Sean throwing stuff at me. Fantastic. PFHXS is a significant PFAS of note. This is one that seems to be very consistent to be in firefighters at higher concentrations in the general public. Rachel Morello-Frosch, Jessica Trowbridge out of California, their study on female firefighters in San Francisco showed consistent high levels compared to the office staff that are the same organization. And we've seen that in volunteer firefighters, we've seen it in career firefighters and elsewhere. So knowing that this one PFAS, affects, AMH levels within female firefighters, as well as having other negative health outcomes, either reproductive or from a malignancy standpoint, it's, again, interesting to see nearly a third drop in a 12-month period. And I really wish, Mick Tisbury and David Hamilton were here, to speak about this because they're very passionate. As with everybody in the fire service, we've all known people and been touched by occupational illness, and the struggles trying to transition from something that's so systemic within our industry is difficult, and they've done it. And beyond just achieving it in Australia, they spoke at EPIN, the Stockholm Convention. The Stockholm Convention assigns persistent organic pollutants under this global treaty. I I don't believe the U.S. is signatory of it at this stage. I know Canada is. So from the standpoint of our IFF brothers and sisters in Canada, it's effective. But Mick stood there in Geneva, Switzerland, with Pat Morrison, Chief of Field Services with the IFF, to support, the ban and inclusion of these PFAS related to firefighting products into that Stockholm Convention, and they succeeded. And he continues to be an advocate internationally as part of the Firefighter Global Alliance, et cetera. So very happy that we have allies like that we can lean on. And, they've dealt with the fire trucks, they've dealt with firefighters, and now they've, moved on to fire stations. So they're removing 3 feet of topsoil around fire stations or burning them in cement kilns that are local and regional in the fire station areas. They're also sealing apparatus aprons, fire station aprons, to make sure that they're not releasing additional PFAS trapped in concrete and asphalt into the soils. So it's having huge effects, and I know that we're going to be taking a lot of the wins and applying them here in North America. So I did a terrible job of presenting their information, but I want you to know that we're really fortunate that they're as giving as they are with the fire service, and we are doing all we can to make sure that we take those lessons learned to save us the time that it took them to enact all those big successes. So I'll transition over to my next presentation as a proxy. Normally you would have an absolute phenom where it comes to testing a firefighter turnout gear, whether it's their coat, pants, gloves, helmet, you name it, boots. Amanda Newsom really leads up protective performance testing at UL Solutions, and she's been a real advocate for promoting and assisting with what firefighters want within the standards. And I emphasize what firefighters want because sometimes it's difficult for the testing bodies to receive the feedback and information. That's why we're fortunate that Director DeCrane has really, proliferated a number of standards bodies with IFF representatives and subject matter experts to help spread the message as to what it is that firefighters really want, what's the real world lived experiences of firefighters, and how do we institute tests and design criteria that reflect the needs and the safety concerns we have. So I'm going to jump through some of the things that Amanda does at UL. And there's a number of different testing bodies or certification bodies associated with the NFPA for turnout gear. And UL is one of them, Intertech is another, SEI is another. And what they do is they help design or point to the tests that can simulate the performance that we need and that we want within their best understanding of what that is, not being firefighters or having that background. So when it comes to product evaluation, something to understand as well is that certification happens for a new product, pristine product. Once you start sewing in your station patches, screwing in, attachments and the rest of that, questions come up about, is it still certified? Certification ends as soon as the product's delivered. So that's something to keep in mind as well when determining what level of flame resistance you need, water repellency, all those things, because those different performance criteria change as we use our garments. So is there a real need to set the bar super high, knowing that whether it's mid-pack or super high after 3 or 4 washings, it's all pretty low. Those are things we have to better understand, and those are things that UL, SEI, Intertech help us understand. Labeling requirements are big. I really encourage departments that have the ability to make input into the procurement process to ensure that all components are listed on labels. You can ask for things. If you see the advantage of transitioning from one product to another, one manufacturer to another, one component or constituent from your gear to another, try to make sure that your tenders and those requirements include the specific coatings, the specific finishes, the specific components that may not be left out as a mandatory reporting criteria for labeling, so that you can track over the life of these garments how they've been designed, how that design has changed, how the components and finishings and coatings have changed, so that you can make a determination as to what's performing best for your members under the certain operational models that you're applying in your departments. Some people use firefighting structural gear as an all hazards form of PPE, which is not its intended purpose, but I understand, budget constraints, department size constraints, there can be limitations. So again, a certain specific individual hazard assessment needs to be done, and then track that information so you understand how it's performing over time. Other things that UL assists with is ensuring that people have faith in a certification. So prior to, I think it was 1991, it was really left up to manufacturers and suppliers to provide us data as to whether their products are meeting a test. And that was insufficient. Everybody tested things differently. Some people had different levels of capability or competency in testing. And it was the IFF at that time. 1990, 1991, the IFF really championed this, third-party certified testing institutions providing that information. So it's an apples to apples comparison. And with that, it means that whether it's UL, SEI, or Intertech, they all have to be certified and accredited through, as per the ISO 17025 standard. And that's a standard that ensures that there's like random audits, that there's instrument calibration going on continually. So it's a pretty high threshold. A lot of time is taking place. A lot of records keeping and management is done by those institutions to ensure that what's being tested at UL or SEI or Intertech is all, the same, which wasn't the case in the early 90s. So what they test for are components that make up some of the PPE, as well as the whole system PPEs, the helmets, the SCBAs, the hoods, gloves, clothing, etc. And examples of some tests which we're looking to transition, I'll speak more about this after the break, is how we're transitioning from a dry, like a THL test, to an RET or evaporator resistant test. So when people talk about breathability of gear, when people talk about metabolic heat buildup and those types of things, you're really talking about two things: TPP, which is a thermal protective performance, the insulative quality of your gear, or THL, which is the heat loss, thermal heat loss. But THL is it's a really junk test, and I'll see how much time I have in the afternoon or after the break to talk about it. But very limited, and this is where again we need the fire service to be contributing. So maybe I'll touch on a little bit. And there's been great research done. North Carolina State University really, spearheaded it with a bunch of grants with Fiero to do testing on evaluating breathability. And this is topical now, and that's why I'm spending a little bit of time on it, because it's applicable to where we're moving to, promoting some safer alternatives that don't have engineered carcinogens, flame retardants, PFAS, those types of chemicals in our gear. And the argument is typically THL. So this is usually done, it's done 25 degrees Celsius. It's usually, I think, 65% relative humidity. But when it's put on a mannequin, there's no reflective on it. There's no pockets. There's no SCBA. And it's evaluating breathability. Once you cover the garment with reflective tape, put pockets on it, put stuff in your pockets, have padding in the knees as a feature of your gear, put your SCBA on, none of those areas will meet or pass the NFPA requirements for THL. Also, as comparing THL to TPP, TPP is done after you've laundered the gear a few times. So they launder the gear. The fabrics, the yarns, they get puffed up a little bit. It provides additional atmospheric trapping, increases insulation. With THL, it's done pristine, unwashed. As soon as you wash your gear 5, 6, 7 times, in all likelihood, it's not going to pass the NFPA minimum for THL. And of course, I don't even think there's a knee product or a knee padding component that passes THL. So again, it's not a fair representation of breathability. It's not a fair representation of how you're going to perform. But what it is great marketing for manufacturers to say, hey, this layup of components that you guys want or your department, we can achieve a THL of 235. Our competitor, they can only achieve a THL of 230. None of us would notice a difference of 230 to 235, but it sells more bunker gear. And what UL has done is they've done a good job of helping to promote the other tests, which can be done to shift to RET, which will be at a higher temperature, lower relative humidity, maybe a little bit more representative. But again, those individual hazard assessments need to be done by the department. How much weight do we put in this? Currently, the IFF has a PFAS-free PPE trial survey underway in 5 cities, and one department, they wouldn't meet THL with this new PFAS-free moisture barrier included, because their TPP was so high, it was 47. And I've never seen 47 in any other city. It's crazy high. But the department put such little weight in the value of THL in protecting firefighters or being a measure of risk for metabolic heat buildup. They had no problem allowing those members to participate right on the trucks, going into live fires. In responses, the members did go into fire responses with that gear that did not meet NFPA for THL, and they reported that their gear worked fine, worked perfectly. They didn't feel hot. They didn't feel it being any different than their fluorinated PTFE version of moisture barrier within their other layup gear. So that's a whole lot about THL. And as you can see here, when it's kind of marketed as it's a trade-off. The higher your insulative properties, the lower the breathability. It's not really the case, and this is Amanda's slide. She's done this work. They've done this testing. It's all de-identified, but you can see that in that box, there's a lot of different component makeups that can have both a high breathability as well as relatively high thermal protective properties. So that's good. So we got to keep that in mind when we're, again, talking to our trusted vendors about some of these issues. One thing that's lacking and one thing we need to evaluate is the interfaces within our gear. And we know that a lot of low molecular weight pHs, these gases, will permeate and penetrate our PPE. And we have to have philosophical discussions from a standards point of view as to whether we want to address this. Are we looking to incorporate more tests, encapsulate us fully to prevent these exposures? Do we have to change things tactically? Where do we place value? What are the trade-offs of trying to prevent full gaseous penetration of benzene and pyrene, and crysine, and all that, naphthalene? And I might not have the answers to that, so hopefully we get a lot of feedback at NFPA's meeting coming up that Sean mentioned. But information that's been looked at by NIOSH, Alex Mayer did some work on this, shows that high concentrations of these low molecular weight pHs will penetrate our PPE. Even if we're wearing a Tyvek suit under our PPE, it will penetrate and it will be measurable in exhaled breath, urine metabolites, and the rest of it. So do we accept that this is an exposure we're going to deal with? We know there's exposures we can't avoid. We fight fires. We go into dynamic, crazy situations. And are we going down a road of over-engineering a piece of PPE where the payoff isn't going to be worth the investment? So continuing a little bit on here, and I'll move a little bit quicker when it comes to cleaning, because I will cover this a little bit more, give you an understanding about what it means to wash gear. And I always try to promote the idea of getting away from the term cleaned gear. Gear's cleaned, it's been laundered, it's not been cleaned. I mean, the standard for an ISP to be certified is removal of 50% of the semi-volatile organic compounds, as well as the metals and the bacteria, the staph and bacteria, etc. And the thing is, that doesn't cut it when it comes to having a product that's clean and safe to handle. Pyrene, for example, at the current laundering temperatures, are removed at very low concentrations. And when it comes to the ISPs that are certified, there's a wide range. If you look at the bottom left corner there, 50% of both the metals and the semi-volatile organic compounds, that's the threshold to say your gear is meeting NFPA 1851 and it's cleaned. There's a wide range, though, from the independent service providers as to what real amounts of these contaminants they're removing. We're driving some changes in the new standard I'll talk about a little bit later after break, but again, things to keep in mind and maybe ask for results from your ISPs, whether you're certified internally or whether you're using a company, get some of these results, because going from 95% removal of both down to 55% should make a big difference as to what sort of costs you're investing into this and how you communicate to your members that the gear is laundered, it's not clean, treat it with the respect it deserves. So with that, I will wrap it up and offer an opportunity for any questions if time permits. Oh, we'll do it. Perfect. All right. Well, I appreciate your time.
He always dresses so nicely. It's a Canadian thing. Oh. So the IFF, I mentioned it yesterday, it's critically important that our members participate. We need the talent of our members to participate in these codes and these standards to bring their experiences. And it's very impactful when we can have our members at that table discussing not what ifs, not hypotheticals, not necessarily test results or numbers, but to talk about their real world experiences and the importance of why we need some changes within that standard, whether something added, something modified, something removed. And we're very fortunate to have a very talented member that's been involved in a number of standards, but also involved in the PPE world. And Travis Tamarantz, he's the local president from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. So he drove all the way in to Ohio to come here and join us today. And Neil is talking about the chemicals that are inside that gear. And he's going to, when he comes back up, he'll talk even more about that. But, you know, with all the efforts, with the PFAS efforts and everything else that we've got going on, we can't lose focus on the importance of the decontamination of ourselves, of our gear, you know, get that firefighter ready to go back to work. And that's what Travis is going to talk about. He's going to talk about the deconning efforts. And Travis. Thanks, brother.
All right. All right. Thanks, Sean. So my name's Travis Tamarantz, as Sean said. Come from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, president of Local 104. I'm also the chair of the Pennsylvania State Association PFAS Advisory Board. Let's make sure we're working here. There we go. All right, so a couple things that we're going to talk about today. We want to discuss why PPE, decon, and cleaning is needed. And then we're going to actually go through that process a little bit about the proper way to do it. So why do we need a decon? And I think this quote goes back a couple years from the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, but it's extremely important and I think really hits home to where we're at here in the fire service, that it's the most cancer is the most dangerous, under-recognized threat to the health and safety of our nation's firefighters. So I think we've come a long way with legislation, policies. We understand, I think the labor side, the management side is finally starting to come together on this, realize that we do have an epidemic going on in the fire service, but we need more work in the firehouse. Our firefighters, that are out there on the front lines really need to understand why this is such an epidemic, not just that we have the potential to get cancer. We know that. We know going to a fire and the smoke and the soot, they're all problems, but we really need to have these conversations sitting at the kitchen table and start to bring this up right from day one, from the recruit firefighter, to the senior firefighter. There's constantly mixed opinions from some of the guys that have been doing this for so long that tradition always impedes this. What we're used to doing, things to that effect. So I think we need to get into the weeds here a little bit and take a look at what's actually going on around the country. I think everybody now probably knows somebody that was affected by occupational cancer, whether it's within your own department or another department. But take a look at some of these ages, the cancers, and the locations. This is what's going on, right? So these these 6 that I randomly picked from the IFF line of duty database, I think it kind of shows the range of what we're dealing with right now. So you have a 28-year-old with stomach cancer, a 50-year-old with brain cancer, a 60-year-old with leukemia. Like, it's every age, it's every location. This isn't, just localized to Cleveland or to Boston or, to Wilkes-Barre. This is all over the country. We're experiencing this everywhere. And as we look at some of the trends, take a look at 2015 to 2020, the names that were added to that IFF line of duty database. 75% of those names came from occupational cancer. And in 2019, there were 202. And 2022, 348 of those names added to the database were line of duty deaths in 2022. There was a big amount added because of COVID. However, I went back, I counted those names again, and 348 deaths just in 2022. That's almost one a day. So I think it's very difficult to say that we don't have a problem. And these are the numbers that we really need to start getting into the firehouse and understanding that this is affecting everybody everywhere. And look at these numbers. This isn't acceptable. So where are we getting these exposures from? Well, as I said, smoke, soot, byproducts of combustion, which are volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the other word that we all know now, PFAS, the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. You know, Neil just touched on a lot of the testing that's going on, understanding what's getting into our gear, and that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about some of this decon and why we need to be doing it the right way and not just throwing our turnout gear in a washing machine and calling it okay. So let's talk about a little bit about the smoke, soot, and byproducts of combustion. So there's over 285 known chemicals in smoke, soot, and byproducts of combustion. Some of those things, hydrogen chloride, hydrochloric acid, formaldehyde. I mean, I don't know if there's any hazmat guys here, but anybody in the fire service, would you be going to a chlorine leak, not wearing your PPE that you need to be, not wearing your SCBA, not wearing, a level A hazmat suit, depending on what you're dealing with? Would you just come back, not shower, not, decon any of that PPE? No. What we're dealing with now, today, is essentially a hazardous materials incident. But we're still stuck in tradition, slowly changing that, but we're still stuck in tradition that we think it's a residential fire, we smell like smoke, we take a shower, and we call it good. Maybe we throw our gear in, maybe we take a shower, who knows? We still have a lot of work to do as far as our residential fires, our dumpster fires, our car fires, even some of our trash and outside, debris fires. Talking about polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, all right, PAHs. These are a whole nother set of chemicals that are found in burning oil, gas, trash, wood, and commonly found in diesel exhaust. Why we have diesel capture systems. But one of the big things that, I constantly see in firehouses across the country is, you'll hook it up when you come back after you back into the station. You drive out, and then you do the same thing. You back all the way in. You don't get out. You don't hook it up first. We're only getting 50% use out of that diesel capture system. It's still getting onto the walls. If your turnout gear is kept on the apparatus floor, still getting into the air. We know that these the PAHs are known to cause adverse health effects. They're just as dangerous as the PFAS and all the other carcinogens that we're being exposed to. Moving on to the PFAS, like I said, I think we all know that PFAS is found in our gear. We also know that it's in the AFFF foams. But getting that education out there, we now know that it attaches to dust particles. It's found in the dust particles around our firehouse. So every day we walk into work, we walk into the firehouse, we have that exposure right out of the gate. Just taking your gear from the turnout, from your turnout rack, your gear storage, wherever it is, putting it on the apparatus is an exposure. So who comes up with what is a cancer? What causes cancer in humans? And that's the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. A lot of those chemicals that are found that I just talked about, the PAHs, the PFAS, the smoke, soot, combustion, they're all known as group 1 carcinogens. Those are known to cause cancers in humans. A recent monogram that the IARC just came out with, 132, it now labels the profession of firefighting as a group 1 known carcinogen because of those chemicals. It was a 2, which meant it was potentially cause cancer in humans, which was because of the sleep deprivation and sleep cycle changes. But they have now upgraded that to a group 1. So the fire service as a profession, as an occupation, is known to cause cancer in humans. How are we getting it into our body? Well, we're inhaling it. We know that from when we're not wearing our SCBA, our off-gassing of our gear. We're ingesting it. We come out of a fire or a car fire, dumpster fire, whatever that is. We don't wash our hands. We go back, we get a bagel, or it's a long extended scene and somebody brings us pizza. What do? We don't wash our hands. We just pick up the pizza, we take the slice, we eat it. We just ingested everything that was on our hands. So just some things to think about here, that these are the conversations that we need to be having. We need to we're doing a good job of changing that culture, but this starts at day one. It starts with the recruits. It starts with the conversations in the firehouse, just as much as talking about forcible entry or how we're going to ladder a building. These are the conversations that need to be occurring. And finally, our absorption, which is why we need to talk about decon and why it's important. So the dermal rate, getting it in through our skin. We know that these carcinogens are embedding into our turnout gear. As Neil said, our gear is never going to be clean. We are never going to eliminate the PFAS that comes, the PAHs, or those VOCs. They're in there. So again, every time we touch our turnout gear, it's an exposure. As we increase our body temperature, as soon as we put our gear on, it opens our pores, and we're increasing that absorption. So whatever's in our gear, no matter if it's just laundered, we're still absorbing that into our body. Let's talk a little bit about PPE. So again, what do we know? We know that all those particulates are impregnating into our turnout gear. We listened, for 2 days of lectures on lithium-ion batteries, solar panels, you name it, we listened to it. There's an exposure just in that alone. The increase in those heavy metals, the coppers and the aluminums, all of those compounds that are impregnating into our gear, and as I just said, every time we touch it, we're being exposed to that. And the last one, off-gassing, and the particulates can transfer to personal effects in vehicles. So if we go into the firehouse, we take our gear, we put it in our car, we transfer stations for an overtime shift, or we're working out of a different firehouse, and we're throwing that in the back seat of our car, that's an exposure. And then what happens? You get off shift, you go home, you pick up your daughter or your son, put them in the back seat. Now you just transfer that to them. So it's affecting more than just us. This is affecting our families, our friends, whoever's in our vehicle. If we're not washing our uniforms or changing our uniforms before we're going home from shift, this is all transferring to everybody around us as well. So Neil kind of covered a little bit of this, that we know that there's an increase in the VOCs by our urine output and our exhaled breath. We're absorbing those. We're getting that into our body. We now know that there are more than 20 types of PFAS that could be present in our gear. And any abrasions or weathering, any heat stress to our gear is causing an increase in the PFAS. Laundering it had little effect to get rid of it. If it did reduce it in some of the studies, it was because it was being washed away in the water, but it's not enough to eliminate it. We know that search and interior attack firefighters had higher contaminants on their hands and their neck than other firefighters because of touching everything inside the building. So we know that that's transferring through our gloves, through our hands. Our outside vent firefighters had higher levels on their neck, typically because of inconsistent hood use. So their hoods weren't on, or they'd be ventilating a window without a CBA on, and so the point being of that bullet is that you're still getting that absorption on the outside of the building. You don't necessarily just have to be interior. And that brings us to the glove and hood laundering consideration, that we can't forget about those. Those are becoming just as important as our turnout gear. We know we got to throw our pants and our coat in there, but I see a lot of people forgetting about their gloves, where you'll rinse them off with a hose and that's where it ends. Let's get into the decon and the cleaning part of it a little bit. So NFPA 1851 is the governing standard for cleaning and decontamination of our gear. That is the standard that sets what we need to do and how we need to do it the right way. And the purpose of it is to establish a program that will reduce the safety risks and the potential health risk with poorly maintained, contaminated, or damaged protective ensembles. So again, it's not just going and throwing your gear in an extractor, drying it, and calling it a day. What does that 1851 cover? It's the selection, inspection, cleaning and decon, repair, storage, and the retirement, disposition, and special incident procedures. We're going to focus specifically on cleaning and decon because the standard is a little large, and we don't have nearly enough time to cover all of that. So let's talk about cleaning and decon, and we'll break it down into a couple of steps. So prior to the incident, during the incident, after it, and then advanced cleanings. So at the station, this is your routine inspection. You take your gear from the rack, and you just have to check it over for any rips, tears, abrasions, any type of other damage, if it's soiled or contaminated. If any of that is found, it should be inspected by an independent service provider or an ISP. A lot of the gear manufacturers offer training online for the on how to inspect and train, or clean your gear. Each one is kind of different, but you can contact whoever your sales rep is. They should be able to direct you and exactly what that training certification level will be, if it is an ISP certification or not, or if it's just for each firefighter to have a better understanding of what they need to be looking for. As we move into the scene, most people would know this as gross decon. However, we can't call it that because we're not decontaminating. So it's preliminary exposure reduction. And all these are techniques for reducing the contaminant soiling on the exterior of the ensemble following incident operations. But most importantly, if you take nothing else from this slide, and why this is so important, is that it reduces the contaminants by 85% before you even launder your gear. Again, we're never going to get to that 100% mark, but we're already at the scene taking 85% of the heavy contaminants off of us. How do we do that? And I think one of the biggest struggles right now is to remain on air, but this is typically set up by your operator or somebody designated, whatever your policy, your department policy may be. Typically with like a low pressure line or a garden hose, you can do it wet or dry. If you're returning to fire operations, so you're not soaking wet, come out of the building, stay on air, get brushed off, take your gear off, go do your rehab, get a bottle of water, do whatever you're doing, go back in. When you're done and getting ready to leave, you come out. That's when you get hosed off. Soft bristle brush, not to make sure you don't damage any of your gear, and mild detergent may be used. The exact detergent and the requirements are all listed in the NFPA standard. Leaving the scene, your gear should be doffed, bagged, and not kept inside the apparatus cab, because then we're going back to the inhalation issue that we have. So if you can store it in a compartment on the way back, just like you would wet and dirty hose, or you have a pickup truck, something to that effect that you can put it in, put it in. When you're done with that incident, we're going to talk about advanced cleaning. So what does NFPA say on the advanced cleaning? That it needs to be performed by an element manufacturer verified in cleaning, verified cleaner, or a member of the organization who has received training in advanced cleaning of the ensembles or elements should be responsible for performing, managing, or coordinating the cleaning process. That means that at least one member of your department should have this advanced cleaning certification so that they can help keep track and make sure that the cleaning and decontamination is done the proper way. Obviously, I fully understand that that person's not going to be available 24/7. However, he should be guiding the policies of how proper cleaning and decon are done. The standard also says that every 6 months, regardless of whether you've had any incidents or the use of your gear, it should be cleaned, sent to an ISP or done by an ISP for advanced cleaning. Again, if you're not sure exactly what the advanced cleaning is, contact your gear manufacturer. They're going to be able to help you out with that. Just kind of talked about this a little bit, but the advanced cleaning in the standard is what establishes those proper methods, including how fast your extractors can spin the RPMs on those, the acidity of the detergents that you're using, any type of what actual method you're using, and again, what kind of detergents and the acidity of those. It also covers the laundering methods for boots, gloves, hoods, and helmets. What else is in 1851? It talks about CBRN incidents. It talks about hazmat incidents, any blood or bodily fluid exposures, and the sanitation of ensembles and ensemble elements. They did include in the standard, which is a nice flow chart here to kind of help you with what you need to be doing. So, you can see if you went to a CBRN incident, yes, your gear needs to be condemned retired. I'm not going to read all these. You kind of get the point of where this is going, but it's a good reference point for anybody out there that doesn't really understand what needs to be done properly with your gear or with your decon. They also add in this flow chart, so you can go into the standard, print these out, keep them as a reference. It kind of helps you understand that if, you know, you get body fluids on you, that preliminary exposure reduction has to be done. You isolate your PPE and then send it for disinfection or sanitization if you can. So what can we do? First and foremost, we need to follow that 1851 process. That's why it's there. Clean our tools, our SCBA. Make sure that they're cleaned when you get back properly. We tend to forget about them. We throw our tools back on the rig, and you know, that's where we leave it. We don't wash them, or we just hose them down. We're not cleaning them with the detergents or something to the effect of to get them, you know, where we need to be. Only keep turnout gear with turnout gear. That goes back to the transfer of particulates. So our gear racks should be clear of any personal effects. Your coats, sweatshirts, hats, things like that should only be your turnout gear. Use airtight containers for transporting gear. So again, going back to my point of when you're going from, you know, for an overtime shift and you're taking your gear with you, put it in a large, you know, whatever type of container, Tupperware, Rubbermaid, whatever you want to call that, something with a lid on it that locks and closes and isolates that gear from the rest of your, you know, your personal vehicle. Also talking about that, staff vehicles, chief's cars, things like that should really start to be transitioned to pickup trucks if possible to keep that gear isolated to the rear. It doesn't matter whether it's, you know, you don't do suppression anymore. You still have the PFAS in our gear that is airborne. We know it's airborne. So just something to start thinking about. Most importantly, I won't get on my soapbox about this, but stop wearing gear unnecessarily. I'm not talking about response calls. I'm not talking about fire alarms or anything like that. Trainings. I'm talking about when we're running 5Ks doing stair climbs. We're going to the gym just to wear we're in our gear at the gym on the Stairmaster, and all we're doing is increasing our body temperature, increasing the absorption, and getting everything that's in our gear into our body. I've seen, for whatever reason, TikToks out there that have calendar shoots. We're doing it in our gear for fundraisers. Like, these are the things that we need to stop doing, that we're having we're unnecessarily being exposed. If nothing more, I have these two pictures up here of me when I was small. Think about our kids. Protect ourselves, protect each other, right? At this point, with what we know now, I could tell you that my parents would never, ever have let me be in these two situations. We probably all have pictures of our kids in our gear, or, you know, newborns out there getting their picture taken wrapped in a bunker coat. We got to stop that. It's the equivalent of letting our kids smoke cigarettes at this point. So just something to think about. That's all I got.
Great, thanks, Travis. Again, I think there's a common theme or a common trait you see with all of our presenters, and that's passion. You know, passion for our profession and passion for keeping our members safe. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. Let's see, it's 2:07 on my watch, 2:05 on their clock. Let's go 15 minutes. We'll come back. We'll have that final presentation from Neil, and then we'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll wrap this up. So 15 minutes. I'll see everyone at, what, 20 after? Yeah, around 20 after. It is, yeah. Oh boy, I could pull up stuff on his computer right now. Okay, if you want to let folks know that are standing outside, we're going to get started again. Yeah, Neil's right there. Neil McMillan, come on down. You're the next contestant. Yeah, I think I've given enough introductions to you. I mean, did you give your background from being from Ottawa?
You know, I did.
Yeah. He is. Drew Carey is from Cleveland. No relation. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Thomas Flam. Without further ado, I'll right back at you, brother.
Excellent. Okay. As Sean mentioned, I do hail from the northern capital of Canada, Ottawa. So yeah, it was our gear in Ottawa that had the really high TPP of 47, by the way, with respect to that PPE trial. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the maintenance, selection, and care of turnout gear, as well as changing the standards. And I'm really actually happy. Travis did an amazing job covering a lot of the components of it. So it's going to make my job a lot easier here, and as well be able to reinforce some of these things. So the objectives of what we'll be discussing is really going to be coming down to what is NFPA 1971, what's NFPA 1970, what's NFPA 1850, and what's 1851. So I kind of usually start most of my presentations with a quote, and this one here is from Charles Schwab. He was the president of Bethlehem Steel. I think he was president of American Steel. But this quote's from like 100 years ago. This is, industrial capitalist, somebody who, during a time where worker protections and safety weren't really high, but he understood the importance of having universal safety being applied to workers within the United States. And really, the bedrock of our communities, of our economies, are working class people that have protections and they're safe from the hazards of the jobs they do. And I don't think that's more fitting than the occupation of firefighting, and as it applies to the standards that deal with the stuff that we depend on most when we're going into hostile fire environments. So we'll chat about who's in NFPA, who's in NFPA 1970, who's in NFPA 1850, and why it's important to get feedback and get participation from firefighters. Because as mentioned earlier, they're subject matter experts in different areas, material and design, testing, but they're not firefighters. So where the rubber meets the road is getting that positive input and that interaction from firefighters. So there's all sorts of different firefighting. It's just like politics. It's local. It's different depending on what sort of department needs there are, what sort of community needs, whether it's municipal, career, rural, industrial, military. And when it comes to, proximity firefighting, industrial firefighting, there's some concerns. Maybe the real concern is the type of fuel, type of hazard they're likely going to face, what tactics they can employ within certain periods of time with limited staffing potentially. Those are some concerns. And when dealing with a standard, like these are minimum standards. This is something that's going to be applied to all certified gear in the US and Canada. And we have to have those philosophical questions. Where is it important to design a minimum standard that's applicable to everybody under all or most fire conditions? What represents common fireground hazards? And what needs to be considered in what would be, again, an individual hazard assessment? I think an area that we can do a little bit better is making sure at the department level that we are really assessing those hazards, reevaluating hazards, seeing how things change as these emerging technologies like lithium battery fires and building construction change our working environment, and then necessitates a change to standards, a change to gear procurement. Of course, the standards process is slow, so doing that individual needs assessment is important and the fastest way to achieve success typically. For military firefighting or federal firefighters within the IFF, again, we have different concerns. Sometimes deployments, sometimes change or transition. We hear from the DOD that it takes them minimum of 7 years to transition, and they don't want to see a lot of change initially because it means then proliferating newly certified products across the U.S., across their bases and installations overseas, and that can be problematic and be a barrier, seen as a barrier. And where I think there's the most variability is really within what we're probably most familiar with, career or part-time, municipal, or suburban firefighting. Understanding again how we have different deployment models, how many rigs we're responding to calls to fires, what sort of tasks, how many fireground tasks we're likely going to have to be performing, what sort of training our members are receiving, and again, making sure that our voice is being heard in the standards process is important. And what's going on now, what's been something that's been underway since 2021-ish, has been this consolidation process. So 1971 handles our gear. It's being consolidated. They're consolidating a pile of related standards into what's going to come out as the 2024 1970. Now, it'll be labeled 2024. It might not come out till 2026. We'll see. Sean mentioned 3M is doing all they can to delay the standards by additional 24 months. We'll see. 1851 takes care of the laundering, as Travis was mentioning, and it's being consolidated into an 1850 standard. So why consolidate, and what does that mean? Well, for the most part, these technical committees, it's a shallow gene pool. It's all the same people and related committees. So this kind of harmonizes some of those approaches, making sure that the technical committees and the technical committee members can just have all their eggs in one basket, deal in one consolidated process. And as well, correlation is important among the standards. So if you're out of sync between very closely related standards as they apply to each other, there can be problems. So these are some of the reasons why NFPA was looking to consolidate. But there's challenges, and we've seen this. I've seen public comments be put into one standard that's within this consolidation umbrella being discussed and voted on in a related standards meeting. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. Also, the size of these documents are huge. Like in 1971, it was a few hundred pages. So knowing that you're now growing it by adding additional standards into the consolidated 1970, when we're reviewing, when Travis is reviewing, when I'm reviewing between our full-time job and our commitments outside of our volunteer time spending in NFPA, we're looking at over 500 pages of very, very technical information. And maybe this is planned, maybe this is in there, I don't know, but it leads to challenges and barriers for participation for fire service members. And it provides, again, challenges and barriers for ensuring that we're best represented. And that's why it's great to have those advocates within the technical committee that we can rely on. Again, I've mentioned Amanda Newsom previously, great resource, with all intentions to making sure that firefighters get what they want. So we have to tell them what we want. So starting with 1970, 1971, I'll float through a bunch of this because we know what we wear. We wear helmets, we wear gloves. So you have to have, pass different testing. You have to have impact resistance for your helmet. You don't need impact resistance for your gloves, but you need dexterity and other tests. So it's taken a lot of time for the different types of tests to be included, but NFPA is a process where it's easy to get a test in, it's hard to get a test out. And this is kind of where we're at with some of the challenges with the old standard, the 2018 version 1971, as it applies to our turnout gear, and restrictive tests like the UV light degradation test that applies to the moisture barrier. It's prohibitive for us to try to remove something without providing justification and substantiation that there isn't some type of risk for removing a test. That same type of standard doesn't necessarily apply for instituting new tests. And that's where we've kind of seen, influence from different people with different agendas that operate within the standards body, instituting new tests. So that's one reason why when I was at Fierro, I saw a set of gear that was, $5,800 quoted for a set of gear. And part of the reason is that it's got to pass a litany of tests, plus all the additions. In Europe, where they're following ISO standards and EN 469 standards, I can get a set of turnout gear for $700. And that's because they don't have the same type of restrictive testing requirements. I mean, their Cadillac version is $2,400. And that is worn by firefighters that go into burning buildings. And I think that there's a happy median somewhere in between, but we're definitely at one end of the pendulum, I think, where we're at, and they might be at a different end in Europe. But when we're trying to advocate for removing gear that's contaminated beyond repair, damaged beyond repair, it's difficult from a business sense when that gear is costing $5,000, $6,000 USD. And knowing that a number of these hazards can't be properly remediated, I think that driving that cost a little bit down to a reasonable level by eliminating the unnecessary testing is important. And again, those are some of those philosophical discussions. And to put it in context, when this standard started, this was the benchmark. This was the safest thing. This is where, fire chiefs, fire service representatives, and others within management and labor said we had to be, and they allowed asbestos to be utilized in our gear. They allowed metal fibers, nylon, the rest of that. And this was the industry best practice for turnout gear. And, we're a lot better right now, but it's, I'm curious to see where they think we land in the next 20 years or so, or 30 years. And as I mentioned with some of these tests, TPP, THL, all of that, great work's been done by Meredith McQuarrie out of Florida State University. So minimum TPP in our turnout gear is 35. That's the minimum. I've seen different, layups between 35, 37, up to around like 42. But from her work, again, once you start putting closures and you start putting pockets and you start putting other things there, the real actual TPP ratings are quite a bit higher. That's the insulative qualities of the gear. So to argue on THL, breathability, it's an academic argument. Differentiating between a 230, a 200, or even a 190 is inconsequential when you're spec'd out 35 TPP gear. For boot overlaps, shoulders, knees are averaging in the ballpark of 100 or so. And that's why I'm a little bit, frustrated sometimes in the committee. I'll speak for Sean as well, sometimes frustrated that the same arguments come up. There's a newspaper article from 1987, and, quotes out of that article is that, firefighters are going to cook in their own juices. The vapor barrier is the issue in the standards. We need to make sure firefighters feel the heat. Like, these are comments when people are talking about transitioning from the 3/4 boots, the long jacket, to turnout gear. And, some of those things were alarmist. I don't think that necessarily they came to fruition, but the same arguments used presently to transition away from, fluorinated chemistries, fluorinated applications in our gear to safer alternatives. We're going to put firefighters' health and safety at risk. But none of that's really backed by any evidence or science or research that I've seen presented at the NFPA level. So moving forward, where are we at? Well, as Sean said, next week we're going to go down to NFPA. I think we'll have some good, robust discussions, but as long as the process is still under review, anything can happen. But we're looking at hopefully holding on to some advances, ensuring that particulate blocking is mandatory for hoods, that a restricted substances list is mandatory to ensure that flame retardants and hazardous metals and PFAS and other chemicals are prohibited from the inclusion in the components of our gear. A move to the evaporator resistance test from THL, which I've spoken about ad nauseum. And ensuring glove sizing is proper for all members of the fire service, so we're not shoehorning inappropriately fitted PPE onto our members. And TIA has been provided with the support of the IFF to get us back down to a reasonable transition period. During the first rendition of the first draft, it was put through that the requirement for manufacturers to transition to the new standard could be delayed up to 18 months, which is has never been instituted in turnout gear. We're trying to dial that back to 12 months. I would like to see it at 0, given as much time and attention manufacturers have had to make their required changes, but at the very least, bring it back to where it was. So the UV light degradation test, this was the subject of our TIA back in 2021. General President Ed Kelly put forward TIA 1594 to remove this very restrictive and limiting test where it applied UV light exposure directly to moisture barriers for a specific period of time, and that specific period of time only allowed one product to pass. And we've spoken about this at other functions and events, but that's really the reason why we've had such limited options in the fire service for the selection of moisture barriers and being restricted to expanded polytetrafluoroethylene in components. Currently, there is one moisture barrier on the market that meets NFPA. It's been certified through seam testing done by manufacturers across a number of cut and sew operators. But again, we need more. We need more than one option that doesn't have carcinogens and toxins engineered into it. So that's something that we're hoping will pass. It's got the support of the committee to remove that test. The restricted substances list is challenging because NFPA has inserted themselves into the process again. When they denied the TIA, they said we had to follow the process, and we have this task group for restricted substances, and they're going to provide the recommendations to properly eliminate PFAS and other, hazardous chemicals from gear. That was back in 2021. We have consensus among the working group to move forward with the proper processes and steps to have this restricted substances list and testing for it from accredited laboratories. And NFPA has inserted themselves in the process and said that it's not up to their standard to dictate what can or can't be incorporated in turnout gear if carcinogens, asbestos, benzene, anything else manufacturers want to incorporate that in gear. We cannot restrict that type of free trade, and this goes against ANSI's commercial terms policy. It's completely contrary to the purpose of a standard that's supposed to protect workers and firefighters from hazards. But yeah, they keep moving the goalposts, pushing things further downfield, saying it's outside the scope of the standard, it's outside of the purpose of the standard and the ability of the technical committee and working group to weigh in on. So we'll see, but challenges ahead. Moving beyond into the 1850, again, Travis did a great job discussing some of the requirements and some of the history of it. Again, bringing up a blast from the past, but now instead of 1973, we're talking about 2000, where the fire service representatives were reporting that, basically a little bit of fireground contaminants isn't that bad. We really shouldn't be required to clean our gear if it just has a little bit of fireground contaminants. They also stated that just recording maintenance, recording laundering was prohibitive. It was bureaucratic, nightmare, governmental oversight, and the rest of it, and not something that we're interested in as a fire service. And I don't think that those opinions hold true today with what we know. But again, the more voices added to the chorus of what firefighters want would be appreciated within these standards processes. But some of the same questions come up. How clean is clean? What's soiled, what's contaminated, what are we responsible for, when should we take stuff out of service? It's great if grants are available. We know that, great examples. I know I mentioned it last workshop, and I know George is here, but FDNY has done a great job securing grant funds when they had gear contaminated with Hurricane Sandy, Deutsche Bank fire, when asbestos contaminated their gear, which of course they couldn't remediate effectively, and there was hundreds of sets of turnout gear thrown out of those instances. And that is unfortunately the price of doing business because the cost, besides the intrinsic price that firefighters face, the cost to manage an occupational illness claim and pay for those things really provides a business case to buy new gear and get rid of things that continue to contaminate your member and contaminate the stations they work in, contaminate the apparatus they work in, et cetera, et cetera. So continuing on, 1851, selection, inspection, cleaning, disinfecting, storage, all of it. I'm going to go through a lot of this, but what we may end up seeing is some changes in the new consolidated center where there's going to be very strong language within the written document, which we can cite, we can adhere to, make sure everyone's on the same page, from our recruits to our senior members, labor management, all of it. But gear should not be worn in living quarters. It's going to be emphatic in the language there. When it comes to the transportation and storage of contaminated gear, so in those transition periods between the laundering and the use, there's going to be a lot of language about how you can store it or can't store it, in vehicle apparatus, what sort of puncture-resistant containers you may or may not be required, and even if it has to go into a vehicle, a personal vehicle, where that should be stored. And I know this is a lot of stuff that us that are advocates for health and safety understand, but having it written within the standards document as a minimum standard in, again, OSHA compliant states, et cetera, adds a lot of weight to this type of mitigation process. So we're happy to see that in all likelihood coming out in the final version. Beyond that, there's going to be a lot of emphasis to using the right tool for the job. And I kind of mentioned it earlier how a lot of times our structural firefighting gear is used as an all hazards type of garment, but really it's not designed for that. It shouldn't be designed for that. And if there are trade-offs down the road for durability, wear, and all of it for our garments that have a high price tag, let's make sure we use them for the job they're intended for. So there is a lot of information within the standards to ensure that wildland firefighting is being done in wildland firefighting gear, extrication is done extrication gear, we saw a great transition during the pandemic years from a medical response standpoint, using disposable medical garments and PPE as opposed to our structural gear, and we need to see more of it. It's going to add to the longevity of all our PPE and the health and safety of our members, and we're going to see some availability of using things outside of the typical extraction type of laundering for our gear. There's been a lot of great advances in things like liquid carbon dioxide cleaning, if a department is able to utilize and leverage those types of resources, as well as other types of cleaning methods for hard item surfaces, helmets, SCBAs, etc. You heard Travis talk about changes to pH and dilution rates and the rest of it. So positive information coming out. I haven't seen validation for some of these figures here, and these graphs are provided by a service provider with respects to the effectiveness of VOCs being laundered out of gear through liquid carbon dioxide laundering, which is done at like relative room temperatures, very easy on the gear, and seems to be effective. But to the whole point that we've been hammering home about laundered is laundered and it's not necessarily clean, these are some of the graphs showing how much of certain contaminants can be removed through the current 1851 105-degree laundering processes. And again, achieving 50% is the average, and you can see that there's a wide disparity amongst cleaning efficacy across these different contaminants. For example, this set of gear here, this is all PFAS outer shell treatment, PFAS moisture barrier, and arguments that come up sometimes about, some of these oils, they're not repelled as well with the alternatives. I mean, this is what we see. We know a lot of departments purchase gear with black outer shells because they don't see the staining that goes on when you're riding your vent saw on your hip at the tip of a ladder or whatever. So we have to be, again, realistic in the use of our gear when we're getting information that's with respects to the penetration and absorbency of different liquids with different finishes. And Dr. Brian Orman has tested this extensively and exhaustively at North Carolina State University. And again, with enough pressure, when you're talking about a woven textile, whatever it is, an oil or otherwise, it's going to penetrate, it's going to seep in. And going back to how well these things perform when our gear's in use, I jumped ahead there. If you look at the highlighted areas, you can see after 25 washes, the outer shells that are treated with fluorine-free finishes perform very similarly to the outer shells treated with PFAS for penetration, repellency, and absorbency. So those are things to consider and keep mindful of. I'll kind of click through these. Laundering effectiveness was something that was being discussed as being prohibitive for making a switch to PFAS-free for outer shells. There is a reduction in laundering efficacy for sure for some volatile organic compounds for the PFAS-free outer shells. It's 5 to 10%, which is notable. When it comes to the metals being able to get laundered, though, it's 5 to 50% better removal from the PFAS-free alternatives for the outer shells, which is good. And it's something, again, the arguments that get brought up as to what the trade-offs are, the potential risks. So looking at moisture barriers, it's basically a wash. And the reason why I include all these is because, we are supposed to wash our moisture barriers separately, our outer shells separately. And we want to make sure that if there is a difference, maybe we change how we do our laundering, maybe we change the laundering standard. But we shouldn't make excuses or rationalizations to continue the use of products continually and chronically that are going to lead to higher instances of illness within our members. And so it's... Am I out of sync here? I might be out of sync. But that's okay. We're going to persevere on. Contamination for lithium-ion battery fires is something that's going to be investigated a little bit further. I know UL is doing a bunch of work. I know Sean's really spearheading a lot of that. And what we've seen from some preliminary work, Jeff Hughes out of Orange County, out on the West Coast, has done some laundering tests within their department. And they're seeing from an acid standpoint, from a metal standpoint, the current processes seem to be adequate for removing some of those contaminants from our gear. Now, there's 11 secret herbs and spices using the electrolytes, some of which are PFAS and other hazardous chemicals. They've yet to be evaluated from a laundering standpoint, but it's a gap that we're hopefully going to work towards. Beyond that, when it comes to changes to the laundering process, as you see here, we're looking to remove 70%. It's pretty ambitious to move to 70% laundering average removal of those contaminants we were mentioning earlier. And it was something that was discussed in the last process, and it didn't get enough traction because there was a lot of pushback saying, ISPs couldn't do it. And at the same time, we wanted to go to 120 degrees Fahrenheit for the laundering temperatures. And there was pushback from manufacturers saying, it's really, it's going to be too tough on our gear. I mean, this is gear we're supposed to go into fires with, and we drag people across, concrete floors all day in our stations training. But, 15 degrees additional, heating temperature to what would be normal ambient temperature in most of Arizona and the South during most of the summer, they said was going to be a problem. But we got consensus this time around. I hope this stays, but there's still apprehension. So, join these meetings, RSVP on the NFPA website, which is a dinosaur to try to navigate through, but Sean will help you. And try to get in there to tell them why you want to keep this in, because we won't be able to achieve 70% contaminant reduction through the normal laundering process without moving that temperature to that higher temperature. That's really where the rubber hits the road. You saw their water testing, hard water testing. As well is going to be a component. So some departments use like mobile laundering services, either internally within the department or through an ISP. It's going to be a requirement as well. The source water is also tested for those, the magnesium and the calcium. So let's skip that. We talked about some of these new laundering practices, which is nice because dry cleaning is what carbon dioxide cleaning fell under, and because of the hazardous chemicals typically associated with dry cleaning, that was like a non-starter. When it comes to what we're expected to test for, we were looking at adding two different, a pH and a phthalate. It hasn't made the standard. I'm not certain it will, yet to be determined, but to give you, again, a better comparison, these are things being tested, not exhaustive. But when I mentioned the different temperatures, that's where things kind of get interesting. If you look at those products that are tested for, that's the average removal on the left-hand side. And we're looking at some low percentages, 44%, 17%, 66%. But just shifting laundering temperature to 120 degrees Fahrenheit makes a big impact on the proper removal of a number of those contaminants, which is kind of game-changing. Specialized cleaning will stay at 140 degrees. And when in doubt, until this new standard's out, maybe recommend that specialized cleaning is used maybe a little bit more frequently now until we're able to shift into that middle zone of 120 degrees, but definitely makes a big difference. And when it comes to water hardness, all facilities will have to do this. Mobile facilities will have to do it, but also what's important to realize is within the standard, you're going to have to comply with local, state, and federal requirements for wastewater effluent. So when it comes to, again, what you're sourcing, what you're purchasing, if you're a department that wants to maintain the use of EPTFE moisture barriers and fluorinated outer shells, if there are restrictions locally with water effluent and discharges to be under certain levels, especially with the EPA's new changes for drinking water standards, this could be prohibitive through the standard. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. And one of the last things I'm going to really talk about is probably the biggest change to the standard for laundering care and maintenance. And this is a PPE technician. And this is really kind of game changing. Again, it's been discussed for a while. There was a lot of hot debate on it. But I think it's really important. This is really important because wherever safety is key and wherever there's choke points when it comes to safety, we see these positions, emergency vehicle technicians, safety officers, training officers. They have to be certified through accredited, pro board, IFSAC bodies. And knowing that we depend so heavily on our PPE, that's such a high cost item, which such direct impacts on our members, having a PPE technician required through the standard is really going to be impactful to making sure that the departments have the best information, work off the best knowledge, and are informed when making changes, but also have to continue to maintain certain level of performance and skill sets as new products come to market, as new changes come into your local area, whether it's these big battery fixed storage systems, whether it's a next greatest implement to be added to turnout gear. And the responsibility is going to be huge for these PPE technicians. So it could be one person, it could be multiple people, the roles can be shared. among individuals, but the department's going to have to create a job description. They're going to have to meet qualifications, be certified, and the buck stops with them from an organizational standpoint to liaise with any of the contractors, to liaise with vendors, to liaise with ISPs, and the rest of it. They're going to be responsible for records keeping, for cleaning, life cycling, comparing the effectiveness of elements. That's their responsibility to make a determination whether differences in finishes, outer shells, cuts of garments, as well as gloves and boots and the rest of it come into play. I know there's a lot of discussion about, again, what is minimum within a standard, what shouldn't be minimum. But when you have a PPE technician, then it kind of negates having to go through the long, protracted process of including testing in the standards. You can make that determination within your local department to fit your needs. Inspection is going to be important, as well as ensuring that there's proper custody and control of our PPE if there's a serious incident, injury, or fatality within the department. It's going to be the responsibility of that PPE technician to make sure those policies are in place so that gear is properly controlled, captured, and there's custody of it. And that's a big responsibility. They don't have to be the ones doing it, the hands doing it, but they have to provide the proper education to department staff, to members, as well as have those policies in place. And other duties, I mean, yeah, the SOPs. It's storage. Something coming out of the standard is if you're a department that orders gear that you might end up shelving, you won't have to do an annual maintenance on it if it hasn't been issued in the first 3 years. But all these things, the repair requirements, the storage requirements, or retirement criteria are going to be huge to be incorporated as job description duties. Access and authority, obviously very important. And something to really kind of keep in mind is that you can make it your own. I mean, until the standard comes out, you know, we have a lot of runway ahead of us for departments, for members, for staff and leadership to determine how they'd like to see this PPE technician role be fulfilled within the department, meeting their specific needs. Once that standard comes out, you know, it's going to be mandated, you know, for proper compliance. So I think it's a really great time right now to have these discussions, have these thoughts, think about how you'd like to see it, get some more information, and make sure that you're setting yourself up for success that way. So, you know, to wrap it up, NFPA is changing when it comes to turnout gear, gloves, helmets, all of it. We're hoping to see those changes for laundering, the changes for restricted substances, a PPE technician, all those things that make it out in the finished published document. But until it does, you know, we can't count our chickens before they hatch. So I really implore all of you and encourage fire service members to make your voices heard. Tell us what you want. And just like I kind of started the presentation with a quote, you know, I'll finish the presentation with a quote. And this one's from Sir Brian Appleton with respect to the Piper Alpha tragedy. And this was an offshore drilling derrick off the shore of England that resulted in nearly 200 deaths. And it really shows that it's all of our jobs to really be part of this safety culture. It's something we already value. You know, it's not a change in culture. It's really just incorporating those values that we already possess, we already keep. You know, we care about our brothers, our sisters. We are our brothers' keepers. And when it comes to some of the nerdy stuff like standards, it's just as important to make sure that, you know, we bite down and ensure that tomorrow is going to be safer for our members, because it's all our responsibility, from the young Thundercats getting hired into the job today to the old grizzled leather lung smoke eaters, not Tom LaFlamme, but others that have preceded us and that we've learned from. So with that, thank you for your time.
sir. Pardon me.
Oh, thank you.
Young lady.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Got to remember not to cross union lines. Let him do his job, right? Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Travis. As you can see, we have a new guest on stage with us. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Laura Lee Bransford. I'm from Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm the secretary at the local 4576. I do social media for our local as well as the PFF-PNC. And I'm really involved at our department with our performance wellness team, and health and wellness is a big part of my passion for the fire service. So.
Great. No, actually, we were talking last night, and you were sharing with me how you went down and got scanned so you could get proper fitting PPE. And we know with Meredith McQuarrie, Brittany Hollerbeck, Sarah Janke, we've talked about that and some of the challenges. You know, I don't think it's something we talk enough about. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that females face in the fire service in getting properly fitted gear and why that's important, and maybe share what you just recently did with the scan?
Yeah, so, you know, properly fitting gear goes along with safety and health. And I think that, you know, for females, we do need properly fitted turnout gear. You know, it just is what it is. It's a male-dominated industry, and all the sizing that turnout gear is based off of is men's proportions, men's sizing. And so even when, you know, at my department, when I get fitted for gear, I'm still getting fitted in the men's sizes. So, you know, there's still issues with women across the country getting properly fitted gear. And so I was really lucky to be part of this study at NC State, which it's Professor Kwan who's been working with Dr. McQuarrie. And this is the second phase of the research for female firefighters turnout gear. And the first phase was, I think it started back in maybe 2020 or so, and they were just gathering a whole bunch of data and scanning female bodies and taking measurements and just collecting that data. And the second phase just started back up, and they're doing a little bit more of that. So I went up to NC State and got scanned, and they did my measurements, took pictures, and then from here, hopefully by the end of the summer, maybe into the fall, they're going to look at some prototypes and do some wear testing. So I'm hoping that being a part of that as well. And then the other piece to that phase 2 of their research is that, you know, along with that, there is no flash fire female mannequin. It's, you know, they use male forms for that. So they're going to also develop a mannequin for female turnout gear as well.
Neil, take over.
All right. I know that, so my experience, as I was mentioning with NFPA, it translates to some of the international standards. ISO, I was talking about EN 469. And this has been a topic of discussion at the international standards for firefighting PPE for global applications. And that's a standard that we can actually incorporate into NFPA. And we're trying to do that for things like boots, where we're trying to investigate potentially a peel test to ensure that when we require a storm welt or a Goodyear welt in our boot, that might be incorporated. But from what what Laura Lee was talking about, the issues that we run across is the same issues we run across for a lot of things when it comes to subgroups within the fire service that aren't well represented. And that's the number of participants in some of this research and studies. And what we're trying to push for is identifying the consistency. If you can't put enough power to a study or a pilot that's being done on a few, then we have to see if there's trends. And what we're seeing right now is that the application of standards, both in NFPA and ISO, as mentioned, are driven really to ensuring that there is an average sizing done, whether it's helmets, boots, coats, and those average sizes are definitely built off of averages for males, chest, waist, hips, all of it. For wildland firefighting gear, that requires manufacturers to have larges, extra larges, mediums that fit within certain ranges, and there's a good percentage of female firefighters that are outside those ranges. So they end up having to blouse their shirts or order sizes that are not appropriate for them to accommodate parts of their body which are not within those averages. So we see that this is systemic across, the standards for firefighters. We see shoehorning either into male forms and male sizing criteria, or using other, not fully appropriate examples. I know that they were looking at females from the military, but again, not fully representative, because most of that testing and most of that sizing is done on very young females entering the armed services. And it, again, is not representative of our female members that, could be 50, 55, 60 years old, entering structures requiring properly fitted gear. So it is a problem. It's been identified, but I'm happy that Dr. McQuarrie, Dr. Kwan, yourself are really championing those things, because it's an absolute gap.
Yeah, I just also wanted to say with that, I think it's like around 80% of women in the fire service are experiencing, whether it's injury or something that is preventing them from performing, to the next level. And, it's a mobility issue. Also with those ill-fitting gear is, there's gaps in your turnout gear, and air gaps. And so if you're in a structure fire, you have the possibility of getting burned and things like that. So
And I'm going to keep giving Sean a break here. Because what's kind of frustrating is seeing where the stumbling blocks are in advancing things. What Laura Lee was mentioning really kind of triggered some discussions that came up with respects to accommodating all our members based on their physiological needs. Thermal regulation is different. It's different for our members, male and female, at different times in our lives. And we have to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward when we're stepping off the truck, and we can perform as well as we can based on how the engineering is in the gear. And the real, attention that was being paid to that issue wasn't necessarily from the needs from subgroups within the fire service, female firefighters, but from our male members who have occupational cancer, undergo androgen deprivation therapy, and these male firefighters are going through hot flashes and thermoregulation issues based as a secondary condition of their occupational cancer diagnosis. And for whatever reason, that was what triggered a spotlight, which is, I'm happy it happened. It's shameful it couldn't happen on its merits for other workers within the fire service, but there is a tension there presently. And we're trying to drive that change. But again, more voices are needed, because these are real needs and they're not being discussed. And the people that, again, cut and sew and make socks and T-shirts for a living, for the most part, that sit on these committees, have no real understanding of what it is we need as firefighters.
yeah, it's really important, as local affiliate leaders, is that, we are advocating for our brothers and sisters for all of these things. And, that's why we're here, to learn and keep spreading that message and educating our departments.
Great. It was one question that got on a roll there. I was able to go over there, cough up a lung, and come back, and it was okay. No, Travis, I'm trying to frame the question the right way. I mean, you've been involved with the standards, and can you talk a little bit more about the importance of the research that's been done, looking at methods of gross, like you said, not decontamination, but removal? There's been some testing out there and different ways the departments are approaching it. Maybe you just want to expand on the importance of the participation of the fire service in that.
Yeah.
They control it.
Okay. All right. So I think to kind of answer your question, it goes back to even what you both were just saying about participation and understanding what that standard is, and that there is testing methods that go into the decon and the cleaning and what is the right way to do it. And by being involved in that standards process and understanding some of that testing that's going on, I think it helps us as a fire service advance to have a bigger voice in that moving forward, that we can actually have input in it that things that work for each individual department, because going, something that we talk about with our turnout gear, being in Pennsylvania isn't the same as being in Arizona or in California or Canada. There's different needs, where it's 100 degrees in Arizona and it's 50 in Pennsylvania. So I guess being involved in not, maybe that didn't answer your question particularly, but it's an overall kind of answer that the more that we are involved in it at a department level, the more say we have in what goes into, what we're doing as end users.
Right. I was in Phoenix last weekend. It was 114 degrees. But can you imagine fighting a fire when it's 114 degrees out? But I was thinking specifically the testing that was done at the Illinois Fire Service Institute, really working with NIOSH. It took a team. It was UL FSRI, Steve Kerber's team. Dr. Gavin Horn at the time was at Illinois. He's since joined Steve's team. But it was also Dr. Kenny Fent from NIOSH. Really was a significant research project looking at it. And they treated the mice better than they treated the humans, by the way, although they did euthanize the mice. But, it was good to have the participation of our members in that study so we could see real world application.
Yeah, and I think that says another thing is that the partnerships that are out there, I can't speak enough good about what that is. And I recently was on a phone call with a couple of people from NIOSH. Like, everybody is very willing to make advancements in this, but we need more participation from our end.
Yeah, and I should mention the National Firefighter Cancer Registry, or the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer. That has been started by NIOSH. You do not have to be a firefighter that's been diagnosed with cancer or know someone that's been diagnosed with cancer. NIOSH is looking for every firefighter to sign up for that. And when you go through the process and you enroll, they're looking for your experiences. What roles did you serve in? What ranks did you serve in? What kind of fires did you go to? What are the number of fires? And the real reason for that is to build a database. What they're trying to do is build a database that when someone's diagnosed with cancer, it's reported to a national registry. But when that's reported to a national registry, there's no indication that you were a firefighter or that you served as a firefighter. But if you're registered with the Fire Cancer or Registry for Cancer, what they can do is start to cross-reference that. And that really helps us go into the research and really delve into directed research and really potentially define what are these triggers that are causing the firefighters to have an increased risk or an increased exposure, not exposure, but occurrence of these cancers. And in some studies, it shows we have an increased mortality from these cancers. Maybe I'll put that to the panelists to just talk about that for a second, right? The increase in the cancer diagnosis, but the young age that our firefighters are being diagnosed at, and the various types, and the mortality rates.
I mean, just on recently, our department have experienced a loss. We had a line of duty death. One of our captains, he was 42 years old, and he passed away about a month ago from occupational cancer. And then we had another diagnosis. He's 32 years old, very healthy. He's an athlete, takes really good care of himself, and he had a diagnosis for testicular cancer. Caught it early enough, so he doesn't have to do any chemo or anything like that. And he's actually going to start getting really involved with advocacy for it as well. So, I mean, it's...
Yeah, you can go to NIOSH and just type in the cancer registry for cancer. I should have had the website here with me, but Kenny, I'm sorry I didn't have the website here, but really support the effort from NIOSH. But I'll go back to you, Neil. I know you wanted to talk.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's tragic. But yeah, I could speak for some time ad nauseum on this subject. And it's problematic. I mean, we're all students of the game. We're all, learners when it comes to firefighting. And we know the Nance drill. We know the Denver drill. We know all these really great tools to help us learn from the sacrifices our brothers and sisters have made from making the ultimate sacrifice. But we've seen the stats. Most of our members, our brothers and sisters, die in silence. Hospices, hospitals, at home. We don't have drills for them. We don't have any of that. And a lot of these are from the accumulation of these exposures. And, we saw the stats that, Travis put up there. In my department, we bury firefighters in their 30s, in their 40s. When it comes to just one type of cancer, glioblastoma, brain cancer, that's the type of cancer that in males under the age of 50, you get about 1.5 per 100,000 in the general population. We buried 5 members under 50, the Ottawa Fire Department, local of 1,000, over the course of maybe 2,000 firefighters being, in that period of time. So we're talking about 1 in 500. 1 in 500 dying of brain cancer before they're 50, usually within the first 12 months of diagnosis. We know what's at stake, and that's why the National Fire Registry for Cancer is so important. We've seen the stats from Colorado Springs, 66% line of duty deaths from cancer, 74% line of duty deaths of cancer. In Canada, IFF members over a 10-year period, 95%. 95%. It's not because they're doing the job differently, but the data is captured better there because we don't have the same types of restrictions from insurers to accept deaths from the job. So I think it's a true underestimation that 75% of our members' line of duty deaths are attributable to cancer. I think it's quite a bit more. We see, Sean and I, the emails that come into the International from coast to coast, from both countries, asking for resources because of this happening. So from an exposure standpoint, the first point of contact that hierarchy controls is our PPE. There's things we're going to be able to protect ourselves from. There's things we can't, and those things we can't, we have to limit, reduce as much as we can, and that's why this sort of participation, as being discussed here, is important.
And just to add to that, we're talking about the deaths associated with cancer, but talk about the diagnosis of just being diagnosed with cancer. I've I guess been fortunate or unfortunate to speak across the state of Pennsylvania to different departments, giving a lecture on firefighter cancer, and to hear the stories out there about how people are going about their day just they go to the doctor for a checkup, and next thing you know they're getting an ultrasound or a CAT scan or a PET scan because they find something. And I think that rolls into our early detection of how key it is, but it's life altering. And I don't understand, and this is a disconnect personally for me, is that I don't understand why we're still struggling to change some of the things that we're doing. And that's why, with my presentation, I'm trying to say it's got to get into the firehouse. We're doing a better job, and I said it in Boston, we're 100% better than we were last year and 100% better than we were the year before, but we have to ingrain that from day one so that it becomes normal, to be on the fire ground. When we come out and we take our coat off, we got to take our hood off. We constantly, myself included in that, it's a bad habit to leave your hood on and, kind of forget about the preliminary exposure reduction. We just have to start ingraining that and not take it as being negative towards each other, I guess, when somebody reminds you of those things that we should be doing.
Yeah, I don't say this flippantly. I think it's a little bit of a testosterone issue, right? We had to have how we evaluate ourselves and each other, looking at how dirty the gear is. That's a reflection of if you've done it, right? If you've been there. And I agree with you. We need to change that attitude because when you sit in that doctor's office and you get that diagnosis, it's life-changing. It's life-altering. And you never think it can happen to you until it does. And Laura, I thought you were going to add something.
Yeah, I feel your frustration, and just at our department and with our local in North Carolina, again, going back to being affiliate leaders and setting that example and building relationships with not only your department, but whether it's your county or your city leaders. And listen, I come from a right-to-work state. We don't have collective bargaining. So we've done a lot of work this past year building relationships with our county commissioners. And we have gotten this year in this budget, because of the relationships that we've built, permanent funding for early cancer screening with United Diagnostic Services. So, and last year we actually had to pay out of pocket for that, so not everybody got to do it. And we did get tremendous feedback from that. So that was a big win. And we also were able to get multi-purpose gear. So we're going to limit our time in our gear. So it's like, and that was all of us in our union, like just, even if it was a no, we kept going back, and it's very frustrating. I feel it from you, so I understand.
Now, I've heard from various locals, Cobb County down in Georgia, looking at alternatives for their training gear where they can remove the PFAS, so it's not treated for that. And, you know, I was in Boston earlier this week, and Stevie McDonald was driving me to the airport, and he's like, yeah, we've got a 39-year-old that any day now, right? So, and Boston has had this issue. It's been highlighted in Boston. And the rates of cancer diagnosis is documented in Boston. And I remember I was going up there to present to their on-duty chief officers on fire behavior. And I went in and I started talking to Commissioner Finn before the presentation. And he was unhappy because that previous weekend, he went to a 4-alarm fire and he saw a lot of firefighters walking around without proper PPE. So he said, I'm going to go talk to these chief officers. And he laid into them. And then he goes, okay, they're all yours, Sean. And I'm like, holy crap, you just chewed them out. But one of the things he relayed was he had spent Thursday night, this was Monday, Thursday night he was with a kid he grew up with who was a firefighter, and he was on his deathbed. He ended up passing away on Friday. And Eddie looked up at him and he said, Joe, if I knew then what I know now, I would have done things so differently. You know, and I think it was just that quote that from the fire service perspective, I don't think we think about it.
That's exactly it. That's it. I think we're making good strides with the legislations. We're that we're trying to do federally, lawsuits. We're trying to do the right things, but on the fire ground, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think we really need to get this message to our younger generation, so we can change the behavior then, and really have it continue to build up. So if anybody has any questions, please. Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Good afternoon, all. It's a phenomenal job, wonderful things that you do, so thank you very much for that. My question, I can always have a quirky question, so forgive me for that, but where my head is at, being at the latter part of my career, 30 years into it, I'm an adjacent to a Boston community, so thank you, Sean, for bringing that up. My concern, of many, certainly in the cancer arena, but what did I bring home to my wife and kids? Well, I only have one kid, but what did I bring home? What type of exposure? Because we didn't have any of the laundry services, all the bunker gear, especially if I got detailed to a fire company, ended up in the car. We all got in the car together. Sometimes I got laundered at home. Certainly my station gear got laundered at home. So what have I potentially done to family members? And I'm not looking for, that there'd be support networks and all that, but any type of tracking, and, are we hearing, you folks hearing any of those episodes where, geez, yeah, a spouse got cancer, but firefighter related. So I'm just throwing that out there, I'm not expecting any answer, but something else, another element to it. So maybe you're in that arena. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I got you, Chris. And thank you for that question. Laying out the breadcrumbs of how we got it to A to B to C, it's lost on me. I know it's lost on a lot of us. The language in NFPA about, how to handle, transport, and manage contaminated gear, it all stems from exactly what you're saying. The things that we're taking home. We are the harvesters and depositors of carcinogens, but as well as toxins. And we can't underestimate and not recognize the risk from flame retardants. Flame retardants are endocrine disrupting chemicals. The IFF is acting really strongly in this area. They're at NIH speaking about this subject. And the flame retardants that we're exposed to in fires that are deposited on our gear cause perturbations in tissues that are heavily regulated by our hormones. So testes, ovaries, breast tissue, endometrial tissues. And it has a generational effect down the road. The same thing that, PFAS being an endocrine disrupting chemical. So having those continual exposures will lead to generational changes and generational impacts. And we face so many risks and challenges as a fire service right now. You know, we have locals that, you know, don't make $15 an hour. We have mandatory overtime. We've got 66-hour work weeks, 56-hour work weeks. And in a day and age when young people can work from their home 32 hours a week, and we've really benefited from being a family, having our mothers, fathers, grandfathers, cousins, brothers and sisters be part of this occupation. And that is challenged. This is really impacting what you're mentioning, impacts the longevity and sustainability of the American Fire Service. If we can't depend on recruitment and retention from our legacy and generational firefighters that are following the footsteps of their family members, then everything falls apart. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's something that, you know, the IFF has a lot of interest in investigating further and then doing more than that, but having interventions in place that break those cycles so that we're not passing, you know, these problems down. You know, we all know legacy firefighters that have fertility issues, that have other things. And when it comes to childhood cancer in particular, there's just a gap in research there. Childhood cancer affects about 1 in 10 to 11,000 children in the United States. Out of my home local, I know 7 children who have either succumbed to childhood cancer or have beaten it. And again, that's children of 1,000 firefighters. So, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire, unfortunately. But yeah, it's on our radar, but more attention is needed. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. We got to keep that message current and front and center. Thanks, Chris.
There's so much to unpack right there. One, I want to go to one question on the flame retardants and the PFAS, and I'm going to come back to the gap in research in female cancer in the fire services and the impact on pregnant females. Well, I guess I'll go with that question first since I already started it. Can you guys as a panel talk a little bit about that gap? Because there's been a couple of small studies showing the impact of these exposures on females, especially in childbearing years, and the potential impact on the children. And so, and that's the importance of the registry as well. We can start gathering more of that information and connecting the dots in the research and having targeted research. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first I'll say is that
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
sorry.
no. I think in general, women's health has been neglected in general. So really, just recent years, I think in the past they've always used men for case studies and things like that. But in recent years, they have been, in general, putting more effort into women's health. I've just, read a lot of stuff about women in the fire service. It looked like, I believe San Francisco has has a really high rate of breast cancer in their firefighters, and then there's been studies showing that female firefighters, I think they have a higher percentage of miscarriages and just fertility issues and things like that. So
Was that Dr. Burgess that did that research?
Yeah, Dr. Burgess and Sarah Janke are kind of front and center with a lot of this, and actually a lot of great research out of Korea. And they get devastating studies that are underreported. But yeah, out of Korea, they found all negative birthing and pregnancy outcomes that could affect females in the general public are at higher rates in firefighting. We've seen it for, again, miscarriages. We've seen it for low birth weights. We can see direct correlations between the deposit of carbon soot on placentas to preterm deliveries and gestational periods being reduced, which is things that we need to discuss when we're talking and educating our members about family planning, about accommodations during pregnancy. Like that preconception period is vital. That first trimester period is vital. That's really where a lot of triggering responses are occurring in fetal development that are triggered through hormones. So when you have things that mirror estrogen or anti-estrogenic, those will have effects down the road. From a cancer standpoint, again, it's crummy to have small populations and run up against barriers, but it's really an equity of health issue for our members where we're being disadvantaged as a group just because there's not enough of a certain subset within our worker population. With respects to Dr. Burgess and Sarah Janke, they've found systemically across female firefighters, AMH, levels are about 1/3 lower than females of the same age in the general population. And that can equate to an equivalency of about 10 years advanced reproductive age or ovarian reserve. And AMH isn't just indicative of ovarian reserve and reproductive age, but there's a Müllerian pathway that can prevent cancers from developing in epithelial tissues, endometrial tissues. So it's important to attack those issues that are preventing the good health of our members, whether they're male or female. And of course, yeah, from a cancer standpoint, from a reproductive standpoint, we're being disadvantaged pretty hard across the board.
I just wanted to add one little thing too, as far as the family planning. I think at a very local level in your department, is education on that piece. I mean, you can get into the weeds of legally when ADA protects protects women or protects pregnancy. So you can't force her to come off the rig or not wear gear and all that kind of stuff. But I think there's a piece, like an education piece locally at our departments and in our local affiliates, is education, not only to our female firefighters, but even the men too, so they can help support and provide answers for the other female firefighters.
You kind of read my mind, because I was going to say, we talked about retention, recruitment and retention. Now we're scaring the crap out of everybody. But it's important to know, but there are strategies we can take to protect ourselves. It doesn't mean you're doomed in the fire service. And I think that's some of the part of the frustration from our panel is there are strategies we can take to protect yourself from these exposures. Or if you can't prevent those exposures, how to start cleaning yourself up and cleaning your gear up so you reduce the impact of that exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what it boils down to, is that we know what the best practices are. It's just trying to get over that hump to get them done. And I think it starts day one. The day that you're hired and the day you start the academy, or the day you walk in the firehouse, that has to start. I think we're at a point now where we shouldn't have to tell anybody that you shouldn't be wearing your pants sitting at the kitchen table. We're just past that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think it still exists. So
it does, and it's a significant challenge. It's also a question of leadership, and we need the senior firefighters, the chief officers, the union leaders to set that example and set the tone and set the conversation. I see a very large presence at the microphone.
Glass houses. Is this on? I was just wondering, with the conversation and some very bright minds, is there any discussion on limiting the colors of fabric that gear manufacturers can use? I mean, I get tradition. I come from a very tradition-based organization, and we've always worn black gear. But I know years ago when complaints came into my organization about the diesel exhaust, the reply was they came in with the painters and they painted on the ceilings on the apparatus floor black, so you couldn't see that there was soot. So is that something that, moving forward, we can kind of restrict and make the lighter colored gear what's required by the standards, so that it's less easy for people to pass off dirty gear as still being clean?
I think that's a great comment and question, and we saw that first instituted in vehicle apparatus design, where vinyl flooring within a cab will be changed to lighter colors so you can see that contamination, hose it out better. It's interesting you bring it up, because there was a recent publication actually on the breathability of firefighter turnout gear, and one of the metrics they tested was the color of the outer shell and how that contributed to breathability of a bi- and tri-layer moisture barrier. And it found that there was restrictions there, especially in hotter climates and with more sun activation. There are concerns just with dyes specifically that are black and navy. Azo dyes are often used. It can be a source of bromine contamination in our station wear, in our turnout gear. So I think just in general, getting away from those darker dyes would be advantageous. And one of the reasons why those chemicals and metals are there is because it's a marketing strategy. Navy and black fades in sunlight. So you put a pile of additives in there to make sure that your garment doesn't fade like your competitor's garment, but there's trade-offs. So from those two standpoints, from the ability for a garment to breathe and to prevent these metal exposures, I think is where we're going to get some traction on making sure we have healthier, I guess, colored alternatives.
just seeing if there are any other. You talked on stationware, Neil, and it wasn't on my list to bring up, but recently the IFF conducted, we're still conducting right now, a look at an evaluation of what's in our stationware. Can you share a little bit of what we've discovered to this point and our next steps?
Yeah, it was. I'm glad you brought it up. It was a limited sample. Stationware. There's a standard for it, an FPA standard for it, 1975. And what's a frustration for me as somebody who's worn stationware and then looks into it is that we as a fire service and as leaders in health and safety were really promoting following the standard for stationware in 1975, thinking it's going to be safer than whatever alternatives are on the market. But the inherent qualities that some of our stationware needs to achieve for that standard has unfortunately necessitated, unbeknownst to us, the use of certain metals, phosphates, antimony, with trace amounts of lead to be found in some of the samples that we've tested for. So in an effort to use safety, as the reason why we're spending more money on these certified stationware, we may have inadvertently exposed ourselves. So what we've kind of seen, and again, it's still preliminary, and we're looking more into some of the sources of these elemental readings we've received, is promoting not more natural fibers that may not necessarily have to meet NFPA 1975, so cotton base and otherwise, because when there's a performance requirement, people will take the cheapest, most cost-effective route to get to that performance requirement, and that's unfortunately what we see. And when we see high levels of antimony in the 40,000 parts per million, and 3% to 7% is trace amounts of lead, like we're finding some of these stationware, if you were in the state of California, would have as much, more lead than what you could include in like a child product or child clothing. And again, very limited, very small sample group, I think 11 different things, and how many offerings there are for stationware, but it's something we're trying to get more answers for, but something to be cognizant of.
So we've had the discussion about PFAS. It's out there. We obviously in the IFF, led by your efforts in 1971, 1970, and others, we're trying to remove that, the PFAS in the gear. We've heard some arguments against it, right? Well, what if we get exposed to motor oil? What if we get exposed to hydraulic fluids? So we need PFAS in there. And we've even heard statements that say, well, PFAS are not all harmful. This is not just an IFF position. The IFF has just not picked out PFAS. Can you explain IARC and IARC's evaluation of PFAS and the identification or the classification they put on PFAS and PFOS?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it, and but I want to hear what the other panelists say, because they've put turnout gear on more recently than I have. It's been 2 years since I put on turnout gear. But yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is PFAS are being legislated out of existence in the US, Canada, Europe, elsewhere. The writing's on the wall. The contamination isn't just individual, it's systemic in the communities. When we use foam, when we dispose of our turnout gear in a landfill and ends up in leachate and it ends up in surface and groundwater, this will be contamination that will cost billions of dollars to remediate or will be there for thousands of years. IARC did do a review of just two PFAS, PFOA.
Can you tell who IARC is?
IARC is it's the International Agency of Research for Cancer. It's part of the World Health Organization, and they go across the globe and grab subject matter experts to be part of a working group to evaluate chemicals. And it's interesting because even if some of these reviews come up lower end of, possibly carcinogenic, probably carcinogenic, keep in mind they're not doing IARC reviews of pears and drinking water and apples. There is research out there that's pointing them to do a review. And for PFOA, it was done 5 years ago, and there's so much new evidence on PFAS that they decided to reevaluate it. And PFOA, which is a legacy PFAS, it was a direct application in our turnout gear, not in parts per trillion or parts per billion, but percentage by weight for our outer shell. 2 to 3% of our outer shell was treated with PFOA up until 2015 in a lot of cases. And IARC made the determination based strongly on the mechanistic research of the effects at, a genetic level and epigenetic level that PFOA is a definite human carcinogen. It's in the same classification as monograph 132 that Travis spoke about. It's the same classification of uranium, benzene, cigarette smoke, diesel exhaust. And this is not only was it there being directly applied up to 2015, but it's a degradation product from the replacement PFAS that are used in our turnout gear. So if you got gear that was manufactured in 2019, some of the branch chain and precursors degrade down to PFOA. PFOS, which is more closely associated with AFFF foam, was designated as a possible carcinogenic agent to humans. But again, possible and limited, when those terms are used by ARC, they are significant. And for the purpose of added risk and hazards to humans or the ecology, that's still significant enough. So this reclassification occurred, I guess, in October of this last year. It is significant. When we talk about, putting the blue ribbon on the worst chemical that we're being exposed to, I mean, it's out of context. These are things that we don't need to be exposed to. As I spoke about, performance, penetration, resistance, all those things. If we're covered in diesel fuel in a structure fire, most of us have access to spare gear, second sets of gear. We have decon on scene with soap and buckets and agitation with brushes and the rest of it. We can address those hazards in other ways than engineering a chemical back into our gear that you're going to be wearing for the next 10 years for the life of your gear, knowing that it might be outlawed or banned in your state or province or jurisdiction.
I saw there was a recent report that legal advisors for the industry warned them that the lawsuits that are coming from PFAS will far outweigh cigarettes, chemical, anything that's been to date. So, Travis?
Yeah, amen. Honestly, as somebody that wears this gear every day, for me, it's more important to have that out of there. Every day that I'm walking into the firehouse and I'm taking my gear from the rack and putting it on the rig, it's an exposure. I'm not getting oil or diesel fuel or anything on me every single day. And as the end user, it'd be like going and buying a car without seatbelts. That's where I'm at right now. We need to have a better option, and it needs to be out of there, as far as I'm concerned. We know the adverse effects that it has. We're specifically talking about cancer, but there's other health effects that it has on us, and the research is out there, but it's not just specifically cancer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both of you said, and unfortunately, where I live, we get hit with a double whammy because if you're a firefighter, you're exposed with our gear and everything else. But I live on the Cape Fear River in Wilmington, where Gen X it has been dumped into the river from Kenmore and DuPont, and has gotten to the wells all around both the counties that surround the Cape Fear River. And actually, 2 of our fire stations were on well water and were tested in this past year, and there was Gen X in the water as well. And so some of those firefighters that have been stationed there a long time, are very worried about their health as well. And so it's scary. It's scary, and I don't want it in my gear. I've changed the way I was guilty of working out and doing air consumption drills in my gear prior to Alts in Vegas, and I cut that all out. I don't do that anymore. I've changed the way I do a lot of things, as well as other people at our fire department as well. So
Great.
yeah.
I see Obi has a question.
Hey, Chief DeGrain, appreciate y'all coming out here. My question is this: are apparatus manufacturers or real apparatus manufacturers design rigs that where you could put the turnout gear in a different compartment? I mean, it may be in the cab, but like how you got a cooler, you can open it up, put it in that airtight seal compartment, so we don't be rotting with that in the cab with us, because many of us done got switching shifts, and you say, oh, y'all caught to work, because you can smell the gear off gassing. So, like the gentleman said, you know, buildings have to be planned for the future, how they didn't plan for that airplane to hit a, you know, it was planned for 1950 airplanes. So since this cancer thing is pretty big, our apparatus manufacturers planning cabs where we can put our turnout gear in a separate compartment in the cab where we can open the door, pull it out, and put it on. And when we come back from a fire, you know, we can take the gear off and put it in that airtight cab where we don't be smelling that off gas of, you know, the fire. Even though I know it's gonna cost more money, but I'm saying that obviously this cancer is becoming an issue, and the little money that we have to spend for a new cab is probably going to be a lot less than spending it for cancer and watching firefighters die. I mean, that's just a question. I know you can't predict the future, but is that something y'all can try to push apparatus manufacturers to try to do?
Yeah, it's, I mean, that's a great comment and question. And there's some great resources out there for subject matter experts on apparatus design. Chris Bader out of Coral Springs, Florida, he's part of the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. They run a clean cab model out of a lot of that Southern Florida area. They've got resources for that. But yeah, it's not in the cab, it's right outside the door. It's a pull-out tray. It has your SCBA and your turnout gear and your high-rise bundle in there. And the tray comes flying out. You grab your coat and your boots, and then you're able to get right in. And it's their meeting place. So, you know, sometimes people congregate around the chief's vehicle to get their assignments and find out what their officers want. They do that at that slide out. But there's other variations, and we've seen that. And actually, one of the trade-offs too, not just from the exposure standpoint, is a big reduction in strain and sprain injuries for members coming in and out of the apparatus in full turnout and SCBA, just knowing how high some of those first steps are. So they've seen a big trade-off that way. So it's a great point. There's other great resources through those folks that also talk about having HEPA filters accessible within the cab, and then having SOPs. If you're parked at a fire for 30 minutes or more, it's mandatory to change out the cabin air filter. That's a HEPA filter, accessible. In my rig, like HME I was riding, we had to take out the front headlight to get our cabin air filter. It wasn't handy. But all those things will help keep some of that contamination out. A study that would help you if you're trying to really champion this within your department, look up Jennifer Keir, Keir. She's done some reports with her thesis dissertation, as well as follow-up reports in 2017, 2022, and 2024 specific to PAH contamination in fire cabs, fire apparatus bays, and living areas. And it's an order of magnitude far higher within firefighter apparatus cabs, where I think it was like 11 times higher contamination just within ambient air than in the apparatus bay. And the apparatus bay was 17 times more than in the living quarters in the same building. So, it's a great resource to really justify some of those changes you were mentioning. But yeah, thank you for that.
And I think on top of that, even to scale that back from changing the way that you're designing your apparatus. And I mean, I don't have a study to back that up, but there are some steps that you can take just to reduce that initially. So like I can speak for my department that we started using seat covers, like disposable seat covers that when you take your car in for, to the shop, the mechanic throws it over that. We put them over the seats on our way back from, a run. This way it kind of eliminates that. Some other things I've seen done, if you still have cloth apparatus seats, like a carpet shampooer, just things to help reduce it. It doesn't, like I said, I don't know what the science is behind it, if it's effective or not, but, and I think in my head it makes sense that you're doing something versus not doing anything.
Okay, great. Obi, good question. We're pushing up on time. One of the things, one more question to the panel. We talked a little bit about, Scott Mullins talked about the OSHA regulations, and one of the things that really would be pushing there is early testing and early detection and the value of that. And I just kind of want to get the panel's thoughts, one final thought on the importance of early detection for cancer in the fire service. And yeah, I just want to ask your thoughts on the importance of that early testing and early detection and the value of it.
Yeah, I know several people now that have gone through the early detection testing. have found, an issue and it's been corrected. I can't speak highly enough about it. I know there's a bunch of different services out there that offer it. I don't think the market's necessarily saturated with that yet, but do your research like anything else. I know we talked yesterday a little bit about the old snake oil salesman thing. So just do your research, see the companies that are out there that are doing it, make sure it's vetted towards the fire service. But I definitely think it's effective, and we're seeing many lives saved from going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. With our department, we used United Diagnostic Services. They came out a year ago, and they caught things early for some people. Things were removed. They're okay. So it's very beneficial. And then if you even any of the companies out there, and specifically this one that we used, they have lots of videos and testimonies from firefighters that lives were saved with early detection. And like I said before, we were really lucky that this year we were able to get funding for it in our budget. So, yeah, it's tremendous.
Yeah, I can't say enough about screening programs, all of it, for a number of reasons. And I'll go into a couple of them. But, I mean, again, what we've seen is that for the most part, firefighters have lower life expectancies than the general public. We should have a healthy worker factor. Lifestyle-related illnesses afflict us lower than the general population. Lifestyle-related illnesses are things like, asthma, COPD, kidney disease, arthritis. But when it comes to cancer, super high. And that's why we see 6 years, 7-year difference for overall life expectancies in the male population, firefighters, as opposed to the general population. And the whole idea of screenings is not curing cancer, but finding cancer in a survivable stage. We want to find it in a survivable stage for a number of reasons other than the obvious, but it sells itself from a business case standpoint for departments to do this. Across different workers' compensation schemes, state to state, the numbers vary, but I'll pull out numbers from one jurisdiction: $506,000 average for a fatal firefighter cancer claim. A survivable claim average, $33,000. We're talking about a margin of $473,000 that can pay for a lot of screenings to find those early stage cancers. And when it comes to the cancers that afflict firefighters at high rates, the ones that are found in late stages are non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, lung cancer, ovarian, and pancreatic. And I'm sure I could probably get some hands raised here if we know of firefighters that have been diagnosed with those. And those are typically found in stage 3, stage 4. And different detection services, it's kind of like a la carte. They're not all the same. Circulating tumor DNA, those aren't great for finding certain cancers, but they can be specific. Other tests are more general, which will require you to connect with your primary care practitioner, which is, again, a positive health outcome if that's all this is doing. Other testing may not find metabolites that can transcend the blood-brain barrier. We're not going to find those those brain cancers I mentioned. So as long as you understand the limitations of the screening methods, if you're using different types of screening methods, if you're filling those gaps, but we see early screening for people that are smokers for lung cancer working. It works. Breast cancer, if you have a genetic predisposition, you can enroll in early detection for breast cancer. This is the general public I'm talking about. And you know what? They're efficacious. All the research on these big populations showing they're effective, and they're just as effective for firefighters.
Great. I can't say enough. Now you know why I love having Neil next to me all the time. I just have to tee up a question, and the professor goes off, right? But that's the talent we have at the IFF, and thank you. So we're going to, oh, yeah, Scott.
If I could just add.
After I said no more questions,
Well,
go
no,
ahead, Scott.
It's more of a comment.
If we get fined for an extra 5 minutes, you're paying.
New Hampshire is running legislation, which I think is some of the best legislation out there for early detection cancer screening, and it's something to watch. The governor should be signing it very soon, but Grail does an awesome job of doing what Neil said, and it's, there's a few of those groups out there, but they do blood testing, and so they do actually pick up on that pancreatic and ovarian cancer, and they catch it very early, and it's been very beneficial to to have them assist New Hampshire with getting that legislation passed. So if you combine that with a UDS type, it works very well. So I just want to add that.
No, I appreciate it. I'm glad you stood up because it reminded me of the efforts of our governmental affairs team at the PSOB, the Public Safety Officers Benefit Program. Kevin O'Connor, Scott Robinson, Evan Davis, yourself, working really hard to include job-related cancer as a PSOB benefit.
And we can help locally or on a state level with
Yeah,
that
so
stuff.
we have been successful to get suicide as a consideration for PSOB benefit. Again, if you have any questions on these, if one of your members is eligible, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I can also put you in contact with Kevin Roach. He's our consultant on that. We just brought on Tim Hill from Phoenix to assist with that. But we're anticipating that job-related cancer will be recognized in the not too near future. So thank you. Thank you to our panelists here. Thank you to you. I want to thank our General President, Ed Kelly, our Secretary Treasurer, Frank Lima, for their support, DVP Sanders for his support. And I also want to give a shout out to Kathy Patterson at FEMA and the Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program. That's what made this possible. And so they funded this so we could have this in-person class and bring our great speakers into Cleveland for it. This is going to be online very shortly on the IFF website. Again, your certificates will be emailed to you if you registered. If you did not register, see the Candyman, Phil, tomorrow, right over there. Thank you, Phil, for all your work to make this happen. Tom Flam, thank you for your work to make this happen. And Aaron, of course, thank you from the bottom of my heart. But thank you to you, and be safe. Take care.